Why did you do that? What is wrong with you? It's just an appraisal. This house is filled with memories of my parents. I was only curious about how much it might sell for. Stop being selfish. If you don't like how I handle things, you can leave. My name is Emma. I'm 28 years old and work in an office. I met my husband Ryan through a friend's party. Growing up, I was always focused on my studies. I went to an all-girls school and never had a boyfriend. Even in college, I stayed in my comfort zone and concentrated on academics instead of dating. After graduating, I jumped straight into my career and enjoyed it so much that I devoted all my time to work. Before I knew it, I was nearing 30 and hadn't experienced love or relationships. I didn't think it was a big deal until one day, while visiting my parents, my mom said, "Emma, I'm a bit worried about you." She was concerned that I didn't have a boyfriend or anyone I might marry. My mom has always been supportive and kind, so hearing her say this surprised me. "Even your dad worries about you," she added. "Really?" "Oh, Emma, you don't have to mention that," my dad muttered. "Well, your brother Jake got married and now has a baby. I feel so much better knowing you're happy too," my mom continued. Hearing that even my dad was concerned made me realize I'd been so focused on myself that I hadn't considered their feelings. I wasn't about to marry just to make them happy, but I decided it was time to take love and relationships seriously for myself too. From that moment, I started thinking about marriage. I used to wear simple makeup and throw on random clothes without much thought. I figured it was time for a change, so I asked my sister, Lily, for help. "Wait, have you fallen for someone?" she teased. "I'm getting ready to fall for someone." "What does that even mean?" she laughed. Still, Lily was so supportive. She taught me how to apply makeup and took me shopping to pick outfits that suited me. She even helped me learn how to style everything I bought. Since Lily used to be a hairdresser, she had an amazing sense of fashion and gave me great advice. Thanks to her, I looked and felt so much better. I even started getting compliments at work. One day at work, a coworker approached me and said, "Hey, I heard about this event. Want to join?" She showed me a website for a matchmaking party. I thought it sounded like a good opportunity and decided to give it a try. The party was filled with people of all ages, all looking for someone to marry. I was surprised to see so many people there. That's where I met Ryan, the man who would later become my husband. Ryan is the same age as me. He works as a construction worker and has been doing so since he graduated high school. He told me he had always wanted to go to college, but his parents didn't support him. In fact, they told him to leave their house as soon as he could and eventually kicked him out. Ryan had gone to all-boys schools his entire life and had never been in a relationship. By the time he reached his late 20s, he started to feel lonely and decided to try the matchmaking event. When Ryan shared his story with me, I felt an instant connection. His struggles were different from mine, but I admired his strength and resilience. It made me feel closer to him. We exchanged numbers that night and started meeting up. Ryan was so patient and understanding with me, especially since I was shy. After 2 years of dating, we got married when I turned 30. My parents were overjoyed with the news of our marriage. I wanted to meet Ryan's parents too, but he told me he had cut all ties with them and didn't want to reconnect. Instead, he asked if my family could take him in as their own. Understanding his situation, my parents agreed wholeheartedly. We had a small, intimate wedding with just our family. My parents were emotional when they saw me in my wedding dress. I'll never forget the way they cried tears of joy. In that moment, I felt like I had done something meaningful for them. Life with Ryan was happy and peaceful. He treated my parents with so much care and respect after we got married. I often visited them, and Ryan always came along. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" "Dad, let's go fishing sometime soon." Watching Ryan talk so kindly to my parents made my heart feel full. But a few years after we got married, something unexpected happened. One day, while I was at work, my mom called me out of the blue. She rarely ever called during my work hours, so I immediately knew something was wrong. "Emma, come to the hospital right now. It's your dad, he passed out." "What? No way." My mind went blank. Just a few days earlier, my dad had seemed perfectly fine when we visited. My boss noticed I was shaking and asked, "Are you okay?" That brought me back to reality. I left work early and rushed to the hospital. Emma, Mom. When I arrived, my mom and my sister, Sophie, were waiting outside the treatment room. Their faces were filled with worry. I joined my mom in silently praying for my dad to pull through, but he didn't make it. He had passed away. My dad died peacefully in his sleep, his face still and lifeless. My mom broke down in tears beside him. Seeing her in so much pain made my heart ache even more. I thought to myself, I have to do something to help her. I asked her if she wanted to come live with us, but she refused. "This house is special to me," she said. "It's filled with memories of your dad. I can't leave it." I was worried about her living alone, but she was so determined that I had no choice but to accept it. Instead, I started visiting her more often to help take care of her. A few months later, my sister Sophie divorced and moved back into our parents' house with her daughter. I felt relieved. At least she could be there for our mom when I couldn't. I thought everything would be okay. But just a few months after that, Sophie called me to tell me our mom had passed away. According to Sophie, our mom always seemed cheerful when we were around, but when she was alone, Sophie often heard her crying. She tried her best to cheer her up and spend time with her, but Mom was still deeply sad. Over time, she grew weaker. She stopped eating properly and didn't have the energy she used to. No matter how much Sophie begged her to go to the hospital, she wouldn't go. One day, while shopping at the grocery store, she passed out. By the time she got to the hospital, it was too late. It had been less than a year since Dad's death, and now Mom was gone too. I was overwhelmed with regret. I wished I had called her more often or visited her instead of leaving everything to Sophie. I couldn't stop thinking about how I should have been more sensitive to her grief. The guilt was unbearable. At her funeral, I sobbed uncontrollably. My husband Ryan held me and gently rubbed my back to comfort me. I was so grateful to have him by my side during such a hard time. One thing that gave me peace was knowing my parents got to see me married before they'd passed away. After the funeral, Sophie and I had a lot to take care of, including deciding what to do with our parents' house. We both agreed on one thing. The house was filled with too many memories of Mom and Dad to let it go. After talking it over, we decided Sophie would stay there with her daughter. Once everything was settled, life slowly returned to normal. Then, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from Sophie. "Hello, what's going on? You won't believe this." Sophie's voice sounded shaky and uncertain. "Actually, a real estate agent came by the house just now." "What? A real estate agent? Why?" "Well, he said he was there to appraise the house." "What do you mean?" "I don't really understand either. I thought only you and I could contact a realtor about the house." No. I didn't contact anyone. We talked about this, and we agreed we weren't going to sell the house." I know. I just wanted to double check." "So what happened with the real estate agent?" "I told him I didn't ask for an appraisal and asked him to leave." "Who in the world would have asked for an appraisal?" "Oh, by the way, I got a business card from my agent." "Really? Give me the company's number and the name of the person in charge." Sophie gave me the contact details, and I immediately called the real estate agent. After introducing myself and giving the address of the house, I asked to speak to the person in charge. The person confirmed that they had indeed visited the house for an appraisal. "Neither Sophie nor I requested this," I said. "Oh, by the way, the client was a man," the agent added. "Huh. He had the same last name, so I thought he was your brother." I ended the call and went straight to Ryan. "Hey, Ryan." "Yeah? What's up?" Did you ask the real estate agent to appraise my parents' house?" He looked at me with no surprise. "Yeah, what's the problem with that?" "Why would you do that? That house is filled with memories of my parents. You know I decided with Sophie that we weren't selling it." "Don't get so upset. I was just curious how much it could sell for. It's too big for Sophie and her daughter to live in. I think it would be better to sell it, get some money, and share it. That's why I asked for the appraisal." "Don't be so selfish. What's the big deal? I'm part of your family too. I have the right to decide about the house." "That's not what I'm talking about." "Shut up. Don't complain about how I do things. If you don't like it, then leave." With that, Ryan stormed off to his room. I was stunned. I thought he understood how I felt. Why was he acting this way? Did he really need money that badly? I began to suspect something wasn't right, so I hired a detective agency to look into things. That's when I found out something awful. Ryan had a $100,000 debt. I couldn't believe it. I took the day off from work, left the divorce papers on the table while he was out, packed my things, and left. I went to Sophie's and explained everything. Later that evening, Ryan called me. Hey, what's going on? Your stuff is gone. And what's with the divorce papers? What the hell is happening? I'm leaving and I'm divorcing you. What? What do you mean? I left because you told me to leave. If you didn't like my way. Well, I did say that, but I didn't think you'd actually try to divorce me. I don't trust you anymore. That's a lot over one small argument. I'm not divorcing you because we fought over the house. I'm divorcing you because you've been hiding something terrible. What are you talking about? You're in a lot of debt. How did you find out about that? I hired a detective agency to look into it. How did you end up $100,000 in debt? Well, Ryan gave up and told me everything. My coworker told me he made a lot of money from foreign exchange and I got jealous. I tried it too, but it didn't go well, so I tried to recover my losses. The losses just kept growing. I was so caught up in it, I didn't realize how much money I was losing. I can't believe you didn't stop before it got worse. I'm really sorry. It's just that I've always had this gambling problem. You told me when we first got married that your parents were addicted to gambling, casinos, lotteries, everything. That's why there was never any money in your house. And now you're doing the same thing as them. Ryan was stunned into silence after that. I can't get your trust back once I've lost it. I hung up the phone and started the divorce process through my lawyer. Ryan begged me to reconsider. He promised to change. But I told my lawyer I wasn't backing down. Eventually, Ryan signed the divorce papers and it was finalized. It wasn't that his words didn't move me, but I was scared something like this might happen again. Once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. I stood firm in my decision and I'm sure it was the right one. One day, when I borrowed his computer while he was out, I found that he had been searching for online gambling sites. He had been trying to win money quickly to pay off his debts. His debt might even be bigger now. Looking back, I'm really relieved we got divorced. I also got a restraining order against him. If he shows up near Sophie's house, I can call the police to remove him. Even though it's been a tough few years, I feel like I've grown stronger. My parents are gone, but I still have Sophie and my niece. I'm going to live a happy life for my parents and protect this house with Sophie. You've been through so much, Lisa. You're really strong for standing up to your husband's gambling addiction and going through with the divorce. It's sad your parents are gone, but like you said, live happily for them. And since you're still young, I hope you find a great relationship in the future. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this story. See you in the next video. Is this some kind of joke? What do you hope to achieve with this? Why not enjoy sleeping outdoors? From the phone, I could hear my mother-in-law Kathy's mocking voice. How could she drag her grandson into such a mess? I sighed inwardly. Fine, we'd just go home. But Kathy was about to face an ordeal she never expected. My name is Meg. I'm 37 years old and work at a very ordinary company. Tom, my husband, and I have been married for 12 years now. Time flies. I first met Tom in our university club. We used to hang out a lot, but we were just friends and never dated. After graduation, we reunited at a club gathering. From there, we started talking more often and eventually began dating. About a year later, Tom suddenly asked me with a serious face, "Will you marry me?" I'll never forget his expression at that moment. So we got married, and soon after, our lovely son Mike was born. Mike is an active and a bit mischievous boy, but he's genuinely good-hearted. He excels at school and is especially passionate about baseball. He's been playing on a local youth baseball team since he was young, swinging his bat every day, rain or shine. Thanks to Mike's performance, his team often wins, and everyone says he's amazing. Tom and I always cheer for him at his games, clapping and shouting, "Hey, Mom and Dad, did you see today's game? How was it?" Of course, we wouldn't miss it. That home run was incredible. The game shifted the moment you hit it. Thanks. Look forward to even more impressive plays, Mike says with a grin. Then he heads to the yard to practice swings after dinner. His dedication is truly inspiring. He's always been committed, even when he was in the swimming club before baseball, practicing tirelessly despite his struggles. I hold a somewhat senior position at my company and try to embrace the same attitude of perseverance that Mike displays. When times get tough at work, I draw strength from his determination. Despite these daily joys, there's been a lingering concern in our household, Kathy. She seems to have had a grudge against me ever since we got married. Her attitude towards me has been harsh. Meg, why are you resting there? Usually, a daughter-in-law helps her mother-in-law when she's busy, right? Kathy snapped one day. I was caught off guard because my father-in-law Jason had just offered me dessert at the dining table, and I was having a leisurely chat with Tom. Kathy seemed irritated regardless. When I went to the kitchen, she gave me a stern look and muttered complaints. How can you act so thoughtlessly? Was this how you were raised? If your parents were like that, I'd understand. I was taken aback. Kathy knew nothing about my family, and her casual remarks were shocking. I'd never encountered someone who could speak so bluntly before. Since the pre-wedding meeting, Kathy's attitude had been tough, making it difficult to get along with her. As a result, I limited my visits to her house. However, after Mike was born, we began visiting more frequently for the sake of my in-laws, who couldn't wait to see their grandson's adorable smile. Kathy would dote on Mike but consistently direct prickly remarks at me. One day, with a sly smile, she told me if Mike does something wrong, it's all because of your upbringing. She continued to question my parenting, saying things like, I'm worried with a mother like you, and are you disciplining him properly? The most shocking comment was, I'd like to raise him myself, as if I was incapable of raising my own child. Her words cut deeply. Strangely, Kathy only made these comments when Tom and Jason weren't around. My silence seemed to irritate her further. Aren't you listening? She'd demand. I think, who's the faultless one here? When Tom or Jason returned, Kathy would instantly change her demeanor, praising how cute her grandson was. Visiting my in-laws always meant facing her subtle bullying. But despite everything, after Mike was born, I found a way to cope. I felt stronger as I focused on Mike's milestones, my work, and daily events. These occupied my mind, leaving little room for Kathy's words. Her remarks seemed like fleeting dust, easily blown away. She misinterpreted my silence as agreement, but I simply didn't want to waste energy on her. Occasionally, her comments irritated me, but it was easier to ignore her when she was under a misapprehension. Jason, Tom, and Mike were always on my side. Over time, I even thought that these events might eventually become fond memories. 12 years had passed since our marriage, and our visits to the in-laws continued, with Kathy's jabs becoming a part of the routine. I wondered if this was just how in-law relationships typically went. One day, as I was brushing off another of Kathy's remarks, Mike stepped in with serious eyes. He finally voiced what had probably been bothering him for a long time. Grandma, why do you always speak to Mom like that? Kathy was caught off guard. She stammered, Mike, what are you talking about? I haven't. Don't play dumb, Mike interrupted. I've heard you. Stop bullying Mom behind my back. Can't you be kind? I'm starting to dislike that side of you. He looked as if he'd gathered a lot of courage to say this. All he wanted from his grandmother was a bit of kindness. Kathy looked puzzled for a moment, as if she couldn't grasp what had been said. She seemed surprised by her grandson's words, but after a while, a hint of anger appeared on her face. Mike, where did you learn to talk like that? Isn't it rude to interrupt adults when they're talking? This is a conversation between Grandma and Mom. Meg, you need to educate him properly. Look at Mike's attitude. It's problematic. How could he have grown up without learning to choose his words carefully? I was secretly moved by Mike's bravery and courage. His strength had been evident since he was a child, and I was proud that it hadn't changed. Mike, thank you, I said, feeling a surge of emotion. But I'm okay. Please wait a little further away, all right? I got it, Grandma. My mom is kind, Mike said, and I was deeply grateful for his defense. Kathy's words no longer held any weight for me, but I didn't want Mike to face any further hostility. At that moment, Tom, summoned by Mike, appeared with a concerned expression. What's going on? Why is everyone so tense? Kathy, slightly startled by Tom's arrival, replied weakly, Oh, it's nothing. I was just talking with Meg. Anyway, I'll make some dessert. She hurriedly retreated to the kitchen. After Kathy left the room, Tom turned to me, asking, Are you okay? Mike spoke up suddenly. Mom is being bullied by Grandma. I rushed to explain, trying to avoid going into too much detail, but realizing Tom would worry if I didn't come clean. I shared how Kathy's harsh remarks had tormented me since we got married and revealed that I had secretly recorded some of her verbal attacks over the years. Tom was visibly shocked upon hearing the samples of the verbal abuse I had endured. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice filled with regret. I'm sorry I didn't realize this was happening. I'm truly sorry for not standing by your side. It's okay, I reassured him. After Mike was born, I was so occupied with daily child rearing and housework that I hardly thought about Kathy. You've done really well in such circumstances. Thank you, I added. I've been enjoying watching Mike grow up and haven't been concerned about the bullying much since becoming a mother. I never realized how strong you've become, Tom said, looking at me with admiration. No matter what happens, you can still smile. Oh, stop saying things like that, I replied, laughing lightly. We reminisce about the past with fondness. Having Tom and Mike by my side made the sting of Kathy's words seem less significant. However, a significant event was about to further test my relationship with Kathy. When Jason decided to retire, Tom and I planned a special surprise to celebrate. We wanted to give him something memorable and thought, how about a trip abroad? After discussing it, we decided on a family trip to Kunun. Jason's eyes lit up at the suggestion and he proposed, since we have the opportunity, let's all go together. So it was settled. Our family of 3, along with my in-laws, would travel to Kunun. It would be the first time for both families to travel abroad. Tom was a bit concerned and asked, considering my mother is coming too, are you sure it will be okay? I reassured him, saying, if we manage our time well and do activities separately when needed, it will be fine. We'll have a fun trip. In reality, I hope to spend minimal time along with Kathy and, above all, to ride the positive vibe of the trip to create good memories. I was taken aback by Kathy's enthusiasm while planning the trip. She was incredibly excited, pulling out brochures and constantly suggesting places to visit. I questioned whether it was appropriate for her to make so many decisions about a trip that was meant to celebrate Jason. Jason, the true guest of honor, was genuinely kind and smiled at his wife's enthusiasm, doing his best to accommodate her wishes. Seeing his supportive attitude, I decided to respect his feelings as well. On the day of the trip, we woke up early, filled with anticipation, and headed to my in-laws' house. Good morning, Dad and Mom. Please get in the car, I said cheerfully. Jason responded with a big smile. Thank you for today. I've been really looking forward to this. Grandpa, let's sing a song together on the way. Mike invited enthusiastically, and Jason eagerly agreed. I quickly took a seat on the opposite side of Mike, and the 3 of us settled into the back seat. Kathy gracefully occupied the front passenger seat, while Tom took the wheel, ready to drive safely. The seating arrangement seemed ideal for a comfortable ride to the airport. The journey was smooth with no traffic congestion. We chatted, sang, and soon arrived at the airport with some time to spare. We decided to explore the airport, which had many shops and an observation deck. Mike, who loves watching airplanes, enjoyed the view from the deck. Feeling hungry, Mike said, I'm hungry, so we went to a small cafe for a light meal. Later, we browsed through a souvenir shop, and my in-laws appeared to enjoy examining various items. As our flight time approached, we began making our way to the gate. On the way, Kathy suggested, Meg, do you want to take a break? I'll watch the luggage. Why don't you go to the restroom? It seemed like a good idea, so I asked Kathy to keep an eye on our bags and took Mike, who said, Mom, I want to go too, to the restroom. To our surprise, the restroom was crowded, with even the men's room having a line. The unexpected situation made me laugh. Kathy, upon hearing about the crowd, quickly offered, I'll watch the bags, so you guys can go too. Tom and Jason decided to head to the restroom as well. It seemed Kathy had already used the restroom and was willing to wait for us. After using the restroom, Mike and I returned to where we had left Kathy, but despite searching, we couldn't find her or anyone else. I felt a wave of panic as I tried calling Tom, but my calls went unanswered. I was bewildered. Had they already gone to the boarding gate? The absence of our luggage only added to my confusion. Was it stolen? I didn't know what to do and felt a surge of anxiety. Just then, I received a call from Kathy. Hello, I answered. Kathy's voice came through with an unsettling cheerfulness. Where are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kathy laughed and said, There's no need to tell you, Meg. I just want to enjoy myself with my husband and son. You two are just in the way. I was stunned. Wait a minute, this has to be a joke, right? My voice shook with confusion and growing anger. Your luggage? Kathy said casually. Oh, I think I threw it somewhere. Her tone was flippant. Panicking, I glanced around and spotted our luggage hidden under a chair nearby. Is this some kind of joke? What are you trying to achieve with this? My anxiety shifted to frustration. Oh, calm down, Kathy said dismissively. I've made sure your wallets and passports are safe. How about spending the night on the streets for fun?" She laughed heartily. "Where's my husband?" I demanded. "Tom would never allow this." "Mike couldn't wait to get on the plane, so he went to the boarding gate with you first," Kathy replied, as if it were a game. "That's why I had to make you rush and sit apart. I thought he'll notice right away." Her voice conveyed an unsettling sense of enjoyment. Fury and shock overwhelmed me. I couldn't believe Kathy would go so far, especially involving her grandson. "We're going home now," I said, my voice heavy with defeat. "Sounds good," Kathy said cheerfully. "I'll pick out some souvenirs for you, of course, on your credit card." With that, she hung up, clearly believing she had the upper hand. I never thought it would come to this, but I knew she'd get her comeuppance soon. After hanging up, my phone vibrated with a WhatsApp message from Tom. "Are you okay? I can't see our seats from here." I quickly explained the situation. Kathy had tricked us, and now we couldn't board the plane. Tom responded immediately, seriously. "What happened?" I provided more details, and he seemed genuinely flustered. "I can't believe this, but okay, I'll come down right away," Tom said, his voice a mix of disbelief and determination. I quickly formulated a plan to handle the situation and tried to calm him down. "Let her think she succeeded for now, but I need a favor," I explained. Tom agreed and decided to head to Kunun with Kathy for the time being. In the meantime, I went to the police to report my wallet as stolen and called the credit card company to temporarily suspend it. We needed to protect ourselves from any potential harm. Once that was settled, Mike and I decided to head home and make the best of the situation. We planned to enjoy our next trip even more, although I never imagined our trip to Kunun would turn out like this. Despite the unexpected turn of events, there was a silver lining. The time spent with Mike turned out to be special. We adjusted our plans and decided to stay at a resort hotel. The view from our room and the delicious food became the highlights of our unexpected vacation. Mike, clearly delighted, even offered me a bite of his food with a bright smile. "Mom, this is delicious," he exclaimed, his grin reassuring me that we had made the right decision. We also enjoyed a lovely barbecue at my parents' place. The aroma of grilled meat and the warmth of family made it feel like a true vacation. 3 days later, my husband and father-in-law returned, looking genuinely remorseful for Kathy's actions. "I can't believe what my wife did. It's inexcusable," Jason confessed. "Meg, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful." Though they tried to apologize, Mike and I had moved past our initial anger. I was curious about their trip, so I asked. Tom laughed and shared that it had been a huge success. It turned out they had executed the revenge plan I had conceived. After directing Kathy to a luxury hotel, they went elsewhere, leaving her to fend for herself. Kathy arrived at the hotel, only to discover that I had canceled our reservation. Tom and Jason ignored all of Kathy's attempts to reach them and thoroughly enjoyed their time in Kunun. When Mike asked excitedly if it had been fun with Grandpa, Tom smiled and replied, "Yes, but next time, let's all go together." He then filled me in on Kathy's series of misadventures. Mom kept sending frantic messages, Tom said with a sigh. "Apparently, she had to stay at a cheap inn and barely got any sleep. She was counting on your credit card and the money from me and my father, but it turns out she hardly had any cash on her. She hasn't had a proper meal since the one we shared on the first day. She's been both physically and mentally worn out." Hearing about Kathy's predicament gave me a sense of relief. When Kathy finally arrived, she looked utterly drained and confused. "What have you done to me?" she exclaimed, her disheveled hair and bloodshot eyes clearly showing her distress. No one in the house sympathized with her. "You brought this upon yourself," we told her. "I heard from Meg about how you've mistreated her for 12 years. Kathy tried to defend herself, but Tom cut in. "Meg recorded everything. I was shocked when I heard the recordings. I had no idea you had said such things to Meg. You always acted kind to us on the surface, but behind our backs, you were doing this. And then the incident in Kunun, leaving Meg and Mike like that and even stealing the wallet. What were you thinking? This is clearly a crime." Kathy protested. "Wait a minute. I just wanted to have a good time with the family. Meg and Mike are family too." Tom's voice grew cold. "I'm done with you as a family member. I'm considering a divorce. I never imagined you'd do something like this. You've been deceiving us for so long. I can't forgive you for hurting our precious family. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." Kathy, ruthlessly berated by her husband and son, looked down, her face pale and shocked. She kept apologizing afterward, but the situation remained unchanged. Meg, I'm truly sorry. I'll apologize as many times as needed. Please forgive me, Kathy said with a hint of desperation in her voice. I responded firmly, well, that's going to be a tall order for a lifetime because of your harassment as a mother-in-law. I went through a very tough period. I will be claiming compensation for that. Also, about taking my precious wallet without permission, I'll be reporting that to the police. And you should definitely pay the hotel cancellation fees. At my decisive words, Kathy's face turned even paler. Due to this incident, she suddenly found herself burdened with massive debt. Having been a housewife for many years, the only jobs she could find were minimum wage. Her relationship with her husband fell apart, and she started a new life alone in a modest apartment, working to pay off her debts. On the other hand, our family regained their peaceful days. The following year, we all planned and managed to go on an overseas trip together. Mike, experiencing foreign culture and scenery for the first time, was thrilled and enjoying himself. Seeing him happy warmed my heart and made me realize how important it is to cherish and love my precious family deeply. I'm Emily, a 25-year-old who had been living a quiet, unremarkable life with my boyfriend Mike. Our relationship, which had started back in college, felt more like a familiar routine than a passionate romance. We often argued, mainly about Mike's lack of interest in planning for the future or his late-night gaming marathons, which left me to sleep alone. We were constantly skirting around the big question of our future without ever really addressing it. It wasn't that we didn't care for each other, it's just that somewhere along the way, we stopped making an effort. My parents, Sue and George, were the polar opposite of us. Married for over 30 years, they still shared loving glances and private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were the ideal I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike about something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to handle it, but as usual, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do? I asked, my frustration evident. It's just laundry. It'll get done eventually, he replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument fizzled out, as they often did, leaving the deeper issues unresolved. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, their warmth and laughter provided a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Headlights collided with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I woke up, the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the relentless beeping of the heart monitor were the first things I noticed. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't survive, and my legs, once taken for granted, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was terrifyingly alone. Mike, who had just argued with me about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to sink in, a hollow despair took root. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now felt like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved too quickly and not at all. After what felt like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents Janet and Bob a step behind him. The atmosphere was heavy with a somberness that made my heart sink even further. Mike pulled up a chair next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. Hey, Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us. He paused, looking at me with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Everything that's happened, has made me realize how short life can be. I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come. I want to say something, but the words seem stuck in my throat. What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily? The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for the impulsive Mike I knew, but all I saw was earnestness. Janet stepped forward, her hands clasped. We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you, and it's not out of pity. Bob added quickly. It's because we love you and want to support Mike in taking this step. I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, Unexpected and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering support in the most uncertain time of my life. Mike, my voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel, he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents and the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted, for me to be loved and cared for no matter what? Yes, I found myself saying the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A genuine smile spread across Mike's face, the first I'd seen in days. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house felt too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought Mike would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was learning quickly that his presence was more of a reminder of what was missing than a replacement. In the beginning, he was attentive, always checking on me and making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair to the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are piling up. He didn't look away from the screen. I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job, Mike said, his tone resolute. I can manage during the day. I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. You don't need to be here all the time. Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite decipher. What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I? I was taken aback by his tone. Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nurse. His words stung, and I watched him storm out, slamming the door behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike who had promised to stand by my side through sickness and health seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer and his excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that seemed to have no room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway and watched as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I've got to go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghosts of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the void left by my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intending to look through the photo albums, but as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. "Mike?" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing. It was getting dusty and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me, but it was my mom's favorite, I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. "We can get another painting. It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. "Oh, we're just making things nicer for you," she said sweetly. "You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time, the sense of violation deepened. When I brought up the missing items, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed while Mike scrolled through his phone, his new nighttime ritual, I said, "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house." "My things?" He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this sort of thing." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings." He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to lighten your load." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation and disrespect, but I was exhausted, tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore. I confided in Anna, my closest friend and a massage therapist who had been helping with my rehabilitation. Her visits were one of the rare sources of relief I had. "Anna," I said as she worked on my stiff muscles, "things are going missing around the house. And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have," I said, "but he just brushes it off, saying his parents are helping us by decluttering." Anna's brows furrowed with concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often and keep an eye out." The idea sparked something in me. "Could you help me set up a camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" Anna nodded with determination. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna returned the next day with discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I weren't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna came back with the recordings. We sat down to listen, and as Mike's and his parents' voices filled the room, the blood in my veins turned to ice. Their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "Once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune. And all those antiques, pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. The people who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna's hand gripped mine tightly, her voice laced with anger. "We have to do something, Em." I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said and every smile they gave felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when the full weight of their deceit settled in. I noticed something was wrong when the usual city noise that drifted through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to investigate, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike," I called out, panic lacing my voice. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. "The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. I thought they needed fixing." I stared at him, trying to process the betrayal. "And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around?" His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. "I just thought you'd be safer inside for now, until we get new ones." The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't due to my injury. Safer or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me seething with anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. "We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident," she said, touching my shoulder with a faint, insincere tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize meeting ranks qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady but my insides trembling. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and fleeting thrills. I reached for my phone, its screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the emergency number Anna had given me. Anna, I whispered when she picked up. They've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was a lifeline amid the turmoil. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We'll sort this out. The next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered toward the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and a woman in crisp suits with stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization here to assess my living situation. Beside them stood my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first. Emily, I'll need to see the house and check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etched on his face. What's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, letting the full weight of my gaze settle on him. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, their confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents exchanged glances, their facade of caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the disability service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond ready with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper, he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. We never meant for things to go this far, she whispered when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions. Mike stood, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at him, the history we shared flashing before my eyes. Sorry, is it enough, Mike? You chose this path. The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty, reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With Anna's support and a dedicated team, I began physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em. You're doing it." The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger. 7 people should be fine. The child can sit separately. My mother-in-law Jane's words rang out clearly and without hesitation. Her constant torment had reached its peak, but today was the day I planned to confront it all. At this family gathering, I intended to reveal a hidden truth that had been simmering beneath the surface. I'm Nancy, a 28-year-old chef. After graduating from culinary school, I began working at a renowned Western-style restaurant where I met my husband, Mike. He was a regular customer at the restaurant, hailing from a family with a long-standing legacy in the electronics industry. Following his father's passing last year, Mike took over the family business. My own family is fairly ordinary, except for one notable detail. My parents and even my older brother are all chefs. Growing up, every meal at home was a special event, fueling my passion for cooking. I'm proud to say I graduated at the top of my class thanks to my family's support and background. Generally, I'm a calm person, but I take great pride in my culinary skills. However, everything changed after marriage. When Mike and I decided to marry, I knew I would be moving into this family home. While I was prepared for the transition, I didn't anticipate it happening so quickly. In retrospect, I wish we had discussed it more thoroughly. Initially, Jane welcomed me with unexpected warmth. She was incredibly attentive, bringing treats and offering to handle household chores. Naturally, her home-cooked meals became a staple at our dining table. But there was a catch. Her cooking was vastly different from what I was used to. Jane, coming from the northern part of the country, preferred much stronger flavors. Her seasoning was so intense that it was hard to distinguish the ingredients in her dishes. A bite often felt like wading through a sea of salt. Jane would cheerfully say, "You need it this strong to make the rice more appetizing," and would encourage me to have seconds. Internally, I found it overwhelming, though Mike, sitting next to me, seemed to think the food was just a bit bland. I was stunned when Jane mentioned that she had toned down the flavors for my benefit. Each day, my sense of taste seemed to dull, which affected my confidence in seasoning dishes at work. Thankfully, the head chef, who always inspects my dishes, hadn't raised any concerns, but I felt compelled to act. I began waking up earlier to prepare breakfast to my taste, which helped restore some of my confidence in seasoning. However, Jane noticed my efforts and started growing distant. Her behavior changed subtly at first, ignoring my greetings more frequently and making sharp comments about my cooking. "Isn't the dinner tonight a bit bland?" she asked. I reassured her. I believe I seasoned it properly. Despite my attempts to adapt, it seemed Jane's disapproval was only growing. I took a bite and knew instantly that it wasn't bland. The seasoning felt lacking, almost tasteless. "Doesn't it bother you?" Jane asked, her voice laced with disapproval. "I think for health reasons, it's better not to make it too rich. Enjoying delicious food is important, but preparing meals at home isn't your job. You should adjust to our preferences." No matter what I said, Jane always had a counterargument. Then, with a dismissive gesture, she drenched the dish I had put so much effort into with soy sauce. I was confused and hurt. I was trying to be considerate of the family's health with lighter seasoning, yet this was the result. I felt lost, and my mind drifted back to an earlier event, my niece Jessica's 5th birthday party, held at my sister-in-law Kathy's home. Kathy has 2 older sisters who are incredibly warm and supportive. From the start, they assured me they'd be there for me if I ever needed anything. Their husbands were equally kind and approachable. At the party, I helped with the cooking as Jane had asked. The table was filled with a variety of dishes, clearly distinguished by their origins. My dishes were Western style, while Jane's were traditional Japanese, leading to a stark contrast in ambience and seasoning. The party began on a high note. Jessica, who adores the omuras from NY's restaurant, was thrilled to have it at home. Kathy, with a cheerful smile, said, "I often make that omuras myself." Jessica, brimming with enthusiasm, declared, "I love omuras. NY's is the best." Her excitement brightened the mood instantly. However, Jane seemed slightly out of place. She pushed her own dish, saying, "Come on, try this." It's Grandma's special stew. Jessica hesitated, noting, "It's a bit too salty for me." After tasting the stew, Kathy's husband grimaced and asked, "Could you tone down the salt next time? Can I have some more water, please?" The atmosphere grew awkward as Kathy's comment hung in the air. "Mom, don't you think your dish is a bit too rich today? Maybe you could cook with Nancy and pick up some seasoning tips from her," Kathy said with a laugh. Though she might have been joking, Jane's face flushed with anger. Without a word, she snapped and retreated from the room. I felt overwhelmed and speechless. Despite my best efforts to help with the cooking, it seemed like I had inadvertently made things worse. The tension lingered, and eventually, everyone decided to leave early. It was disheartening to have my heartfelt efforts criticized. That night, I apologized to Jane, but her response was sharp. "You're just living here, and yet you're so presumptuous." I was hurt, but I tried to understand her feelings and be patient. However, the next day, it became clear that her attitude towards me had shifted. She began adding excessive seasoning to the breakfast I prepared, often grimacing as she did. Sometimes, she would throw the food away without even tasting it. When I sought support from Mike, he dismissed my concerns with comments like, "Aren't you being a bit stubborn?" or "You're probably just overreacting." His responses made me feel distant, as if the issue was not his concern. Despite being newlyweds, he started coming home late and avoided family events. The growing distance between us made me question if I could continue living like this. I'd even considered divorce, but the thought of explaining the situation to our parents and relatives was daunting. Things took a turn for the worse when Jane fell down the stairs and injured her foot. Kathy promptly offered to help with daily chores, but Jane insisted that I take over. She began assigning me a multitude of errands and even called me during work hours. The constant early departures from work led to concerned glances and complaints from my colleagues, ultimately forcing me to resign. When Jane learned of my resignation, she remarked with a sense of superiority, "It's a pity, considering how much you love that job." The days that followed were incredibly tough. I was on call for Jane day and night, leaving me with little time for myself. Even when I asked Mike for help, he consistently made implausible excuses, claiming he was too busy or staying overnight at the company. I felt I could no longer stay in this house, but I didn't want to leave without making a statement. One clear morning, as the three of us sat at the table, I mustered the courage to say, "I'm considering a divorce." Mike and Jane were stunned. "Why all of a sudden?" Mike asked, wide-eyed. "We've just gotten married. Did I do something wrong? Aren't you misunderstanding something?" Jane, with a disgruntled expression, added, "Asking for a divorce without any reason is childish." Their reactions made me feel belittled, but my resolve was unshakable. "I'm not misunderstanding anything," I replied firmly. "Mike is constantly away, and Jane seems to take pleasure in tormenting me. Why would I want to stay in such an environment? I'm going to get a divorce. My decision is final." My declaration took them by surprise. "I'm sorry, I'll come home earlier from now on," Mike said, his face showing some displeasure. "If you want, you can go back to your parents' home for a while. But considering my mother's leg, could you stay here a bit longer?" Mike's suggestion carried an undertone of frustration. I acknowledged his offer but replied simply, "Understood." At that moment, I noticed the smirks on their faces, like mother, like son. For a short period, Jane's antagonistic behavior diminished and Mike genuinely tried to come home earlier. However, this brief period of peace didn't last long. Mike's overtime work increased and Jane's ill temper resurfaced. Despite her supposedly injured foot, she frequently ventured out. As I pondered their behavior, I was on the verge of uncovering an unbelievable truth. A few days later, my cell phone rang continuously with calls from Jane and Mike. Mike's voice was filled with anger. "Where are you? How could you just leave my mother alone like that? You were the one who said I could go back to my parents' home," I coldly retorted, "but my mother's foot still isn't healed." Mike continued with seemingly trivial excuses, and in the background, I could hear Jane's irritated voice. "From now on, let's discuss matters through a lawyer," I said with a heavy sigh before hanging up. Back at my parents' house, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension as I began to prepare for the next steps. I spent my days feeling rejuvenated at my parents' home. The warmth and familiarity there helped heal my emotional wounds. The time I spent with them felt truly fulfilling, especially when my mother prepared my favorite dishes. Her love was palpable, and as I helped with the cooking, I felt the deep bond of family once more. When my mother praised the dish I made, saying it was delicious, tears welled up in my eyes. In the midst of this comforting routine, my phone rang unexpectedly. To my surprise, it was Jane. She apologized for everything she had done in the past and invited me to her birthday party, which was to be held at a renowned upscale restaurant in town. Despite my mixed feelings, I saw it as a chance to bridge gaps and decided to attend. Jane seemed satisfied as she informed me of the party details, including the time. On the day of the event, Mike and Jane were already waiting outside the restaurant. When they spotted me, both greeted me with smug smiles. The attendees were the same as the previous party. My two sisters-in-law, Kathy and Meg, their husbands, my niece Jessica, Mike and Jane, 8 people in total. Before everyone arrived, Mike and Jane instructed me not to mention our divorce to the family until after dinner. When Kathy, Meg, and their families showed up, Kathy greeted me warmly. "Nancy, it's been a while. You seem to have lost a bit of weight. Are you doing okay?" Once everyone was gathered, we approached the restaurant. A staff member greeted us and said, "Your reservation is for 7 people under the name of Jane, correct?" I was sure we had 8, but Jane interjected, "Yes, 7 is correct. Nancy can sit at a different table." As I looked around, I saw the surprised expressions on the faces of my sisters-in-law and their husbands, while Mike and Jane wore satisfied smirks. It became clear to me that this was their plan. How childish could they be? "Nancy, you've prepared a special surprise, haven't you?" Jane taunted with a smirk. Who makes themselves the center of attention with a surprise at their own birthday party? Only someone like Jane, I thought. Well, if that's how she wants it. I quickly came up with a delightful surprise. "Nancy, do you really have something planned? Even if you don't feel too much pressure," Kathy said with concern. I whispered back, "Yes, I do have something in mind, but Jane's behavior is making it difficult." Excusing myself, I asked the staff if any seats were available. They kindly offered me a spot that was out of Jane and Mike's line of sight. As the group enjoyed their meal, a special children's menu was served for Jessica, who excitedly declared, "This tastes just like the owner from Ometers." Kathy praised the dishes and Jane boasted, "Ever since this restaurant got a new chef, the flavors have improved significantly. The meat dish coming out next is supposed to be outstanding." Mike nodded in agreement, and soon the much-anticipated meat dish began to be served to Kathy, Meg, and their families. For some reason, Jane and Mike's table was overlooked. Jane, clearly agitated, called out to a waiter with a raised voice, "Please wait a moment, we will serve it shortly." The waiter replied, "I watched with some amusement before heading to the kitchen to prepare." A few minutes later, I emerged wearing a chef's apron and announced, "Sorry for the wait." Jane and Mike stared at me in disbelief. "Could it be that you made the dish?" Kathy asked, her voice filled with surprise and delight. Jane and Mike were left speechless as I cheerfully placed the dishes in front of them. I even gave them a playful wink and said, "Enjoy." Feeling mischievous, I presented Jane with a special dish drenched in soy sauce and gleaming darkly on the plate. For the final touch, I poured even more soy sauce over it, leaving Jane stunned into silence. I then set a unique dish in front of Mike, saying, "I hope this energizes you like a battery." I placed several actual batteries on Mike's plate with a smirk. My niece burst into laughter at the sight, while Kathy, Meg, and their husbands looked on with a mix of shock and concern. "What kind of service is this? Where's the manager?" Mike demanded. "You won't get away with this." Just then, the restaurant's manager approached, maintaining a calm demeanor. "Is there an issue here?" he asked. "You think you can just do this to us without consequences?" Mike challenged. The manager replied, "Given the disruption to our business, we are considering pressing charges against you." Jane and Mike were left speechless by the turn of events. It turned out Jane and Mike had been frequent visitors, often causing trouble. They had a reputation for complaining about the food and disturbing other patrons. Although their behavior had been overlooked before because they were related to me, the manager made it clear that this would no longer be tolerated. "Since they're related to my family, we've been lenient, but we won't hesitate to take action now," the manager said, addressing me. "Is that all right with you, Nancy?" "Of course," I replied. Jane and Mike stared in astonishment. It turned out my brother Jason had recently become the owner of the restaurant. He had been in France and couldn't attend my wedding, so while Jane and Mike knew about him, they had never met him. Jason, however, recognized them from the photos I had sent of my husband's family. "I'm sorry," Jason said. addressing Jane and Mike with a firm but polite tone. "I wasn't able to celebrate with you at the wedding," I began. "I wanted to approach you several times, but you always seemed to be with someone else." Jane and Mike looked at me with sheer disbelief. Sensing that this conversation might take a while, Kathy and Meg suggested to their husbands that they head home first. After seeing them off, they turned back to us, their smiles masking serious expressions. "Can we hear the details?" Kathy asked, her gaze intense. I was taken aback by Kathy and Meg's seriousness, a side of them I hadn't seen before. Mike attempted to explain. "Well, it was a meeting with colleagues from the industry. This restaurant is quite popular, so we decided to try it out." Just then, a staff member approached Mike, handing him a pair of earrings. "You left these behind during your last visit," the staff member said. Kathy raised an eyebrow and teased, "Were you dining with men who wear these?" I chuckled and replied, "It's not like that, Kathy. Mike has been having an affair with a woman who works at a nearby flower shop." Mike's face turned pale. "How did you find out?" he asked, shocked. "I hired a detective some time ago," I explained. "My suspicions were confirmed. They frequently met at this restaurant, which was their favorite spot. I even have photographic evidence of their meetings." Mike, no longer trying to hide his affair, said, "I truly love her. Marrying you was a mistake. I'm ready for a divorce." His response was a relief to me, as I had been considering divorce myself. "Fine, but make sure to pay the alimony," I replied. "No problem," Mike said confidently. "I recently landed a big business deal, so money isn't a concern." "That's good to hear," I said. Turning to Jane, who had remained quiet until now, I added, "And as for you, Jane, until recently you had been seeing someone for about 5 years, but your husband only passed away a year ago, right?" Jane's agitation was clear. Kathy and Meg, visibly injured, glared at their mother. They had been closer to their father and were likely upset by this revelation. What surprised me was that the detective knew so much about Jane because my father-in-law had hired him as well. I couldn't help but chuckle at the coincidence. "Did you really deceive our father for so long? And Mike, how could you betray such a lovely woman like Nancy?" Kathy and Meg exclaimed, their eyes filled with a mix of sadness, surprise, and anger. The growing awareness of other customers around us made it clear that continuing this conversation was becoming difficult. We proposed reconvening on another date in a more private setting as I left the restaurant. I shared smiles with Jason and the other staff members, savoring a moment of joy and accomplishment. My brother later told me that many regular patrons were at the restaurant that day, and after the troublesome guests were evicted, the staff received applause from the other diners. Jason had only booked a table for 7 in advance, making our plan a flawless success. As a result, Mike and Jane would no longer be welcome at my brother's restaurant. A few days later, we held a private family meeting where, in front of Kathy and Meg, Mike and I signed our divorce papers. Mike coldly declared, "I don't care what happens from here on out." Jane lamented, "I can't believe such a troublesome Nancy was my son's wife, especially when I'm supposedly unable to walk." To cut off her endless complaints, I snapped, "Jane, watch your feet." To my surprise, Jane, who had claimed difficulty walking, leaped up, revealing that her leg had fully recovered. Her so-called pain was a mere act of retaliation against me. Her frequent outings despite her alleged pain had raised my suspicions, and it was clear she was deceitful to the end. But now she was someone I had no time for. Thus my short-lived marriage ended without regrets. The alimony was deposited into my account as promised. Whether Mike had to pay his mistress or not was irrelevant to me. In the aftermath, despite the hefty alimony that plunged him into debt, Mike reportedly broke up with his mistress shortly after our divorce. Kathy later told me that the woman was notorious in the local community for causing trouble with married men. Moreover, the significant business deal Mike had boasted about also fell through. His reputation suffered greatly after the commotion at Jason's restaurant, and word of the incident spread to his business associates. Given the importance of trust in their industry, the impending contract was soon rescinded. It was all a consequence of his own actions, and his professional future looked bleak. As for Jane, she was also abandoned by her male companion. After seeking medical attention for health concerns, she discovered that her excessive salt intake was the cause of her problems, and maintaining good health would now be a challenge for her. Her dietary habits over the years had led to this unfortunate outcome. I returned to work at the Western-style restaurant I had previously resigned from. Despite the trouble I had caused, my former colleagues welcomed me back warmly. Kathy, Meg, and my niece Jessica occasionally came to dine, cheering me on. They had completely cut ties with Mike and Jane, unable to forgive their actions, especially given their respect for my late father-in-law and their desire to protect me. Despite the ups and downs, I have reclaimed some of the most enjoyable and valuable moments of my life as a chef. I'm now leading a truly fulfilling life. Mama hasn't eaten and she's collapsed. I received an urgent SOS from my 6-year-old granddaughter, who lives with my daughter and her husband. Her desperate call left me stunned. Mama had shared her own food with me, so she hadn't eaten anything herself. Grandma, come quick. Help. My granddaughter's message was frantic, saying that my daughter could only moan weakly and seemed barely able to speak. I grabbed my car keys, praying for my daughter's safety, and rushed out of the house. What I found when I arrived was beyond anything I had prepared for. My name is Wendy, and I'm a 65-year-old housewife. Since my husband, who was 5 years older than me, passed away 2 years ago, I've been living alone in our now overly spacious home. Thanks to an inheritance from him and my own savings from working until I turned 60, I have no financial worries. My only daughter, Holly, is married and lives about an hour away with her husband. The highlights of my life are their occasional visits, especially when they bring my granddaughter, Lynn. After Holly graduated from university, she moved to Paris to pursue a career fueled by her passion for the French language. There she met Ted, who was working for an international company. They married and eventually returned to the United States. Once back, Holly chose to become a full-time homemaker to support Ted, and soon after, they welcomed their daughter, Lynn. Ted graduated from a prestigious university and now works for a leading tire company, which gives him an elite status, though he has faced many challenges along the way. His father struggled with job stability, frequently changing positions, which put a strain on their finances. Ted's mother worked part-time but didn't contribute significantly to the household income. Holly mentioned this hesitantly, suggesting that Ted's parents had unconventional approaches to work. Despite this, Ted was determined to improve his circumstances. He pursued his education with dedication, earning scholarships and working part-time to support himself. His hard work has earned him Holly's deep respect. Ted is committed to ensuring that Lynn doesn't face the same struggles he did. He is determined to save money and provide her with the freedom to choose her own path. She described him as a warm-hearted person. While it might seem self-serving to praise my own daughter, Holly truly is bright and kind-hearted. She has a good relationship with Ted, even though his parents are somewhat unconventional. Lynn has been growing up happily, and I had no cause for concern. However, there was a moment when I sensed something was wrong with Holly. It was when Lynn was 4 years old. During one of their visits, Holly appeared unusually drained. I asked, "What's wrong? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell, or is something bothering you?" "Well, there's a small concern," Holly admitted. She had been sending $700 a month to Ted's financially struggling parents, but they had recently asked for more without Ted knowing. It turns out my father-in-law had quit his job again. "That's troubling. It's challenging for just you and Ted to bear this burden," I said. Holly wanted to save money for Lynn's future, but it was becoming difficult with the ongoing financial support for her in-laws. She considered getting a job, but Ted had told her, "I often go on business trips, so I prefer you stay with Lynn. I want to support my parents since they're family, but I'm worried about how long we can sustain this situation." Hearing this, I felt uneasy and somewhat doubtful. I considered how I might assist and shared my idea with Ted. To my surprise, he welcomed the suggestion and agreed without hesitation. I was relieved at the time, but things didn't go as smoothly as hoped. 2 years later, a new issue emerged. Ted was assigned to work abroad, and would be stationed there alone. His parents, concerned about Holly and Lynn managing on their own, proposed that they all move in together. Though Ted wanted to respect Holly's wishes, his parents' insistence made it difficult for her to refuse. Consequently, they decided to live together for the year until Ted's return. Knowing the challenges Holly had faced with her in-laws, I made it a point to stay in regular contact and check on her. "It's okay. My father-in-law's new job seems to have a good environment. It might work out this time, and since Ted helped him find it, that's a positive sign." Despite her reassurance, a mother's intuition, or whatever you might call it, told me that something was off with Holly's tone. Then communication from her abruptly ceased. I tried reaching out multiple times, but all I got were voicemails and no replies. After 6 months of Ted being away, I finally managed to reconnect with Holly. "Hello, Holly, I'm relieved to finally get through. Summer is almost over. How are you doing? I'm fine. I was hoping you and Lynn would visit during the summer vacation. Mom, I'm sorry. We've been really busy. I need to go now. I'll talk to you later. Wait, but before I could say more, the call abruptly ended. Holly's voice had sounded noticeably less upbeat. What's going on, Holly? I haven't seen you in over 6 months. Are you both really okay? My anxiety grew, and I realized I couldn't wait any longer. Just then, an unexpected call came through from Holly's phone. Mom doesn't have any food, and she's collapsed. The distressed voice of my granddaughter, Lynn, came through the line. Lynn, what's happening? I asked urgently. Mom gave her food to me, so she hasn't eaten anything. Grandma, please come help us. From the tearful voice on the phone, I could tell Holly was exhausted and struggling to communicate. Are there any adults around, like Grandpa or Grandma? If they find out I called, I'll be in trouble, Lynn said. That's when I recalled what Holly had mentioned. She had taught Lynn how to use her cell phone and delete the call history, so Lynn could expose the situation to Holly's in-laws if needed. Hold on, I'm on my way, I said, telling Lynn to stay somewhere safe. I quickly drove to the in-laws' house, my heart racing. Holly, I'm coming. As I drove, tears streamed down my face. I was filled with guilt for not realizing the situation sooner and seething with anger toward Holly's in-laws. What have they done to my precious daughter and granddaughter? I'll never forgive them. Fueled by my anger, I pressed the accelerator harder. When I arrived at the in-laws' house, I rang the doorbell, but there was no immediate response. After repeatedly pressing the button, a voice finally answered. Why are you ringing so much? Who is it? I'm Holly's mother. What? You didn't give any notice. Why are you here? It was clear Holly's father-in-law was surprised and hesitant to come to the door. I'm sorry for the unexpected visit, but I need to see Holly. May I come in? No. Holly and Lynn aren't here. Go home. I know they're here. Is there another reason you're not letting me in? Enough. Don't come back. Just then, a deep voice resonated from behind me. Before I could react, a man appeared in front of me. That voice, could it be? I heard sounds of movement from inside the house, and the front door opened to reveal a stunned father-in-law. Boss, what are you doing here? The man was the CEO of the company where Holly's father-in-law worked. After learning about the in-laws' financial demands from Holly, I had taken action discreetly. Without informing Holly, I reached out to Ted and introduced him to a company run by an old friend of mine. I wanted Holly's father-in-law to find employment there and achieve financial independence. The CEO, understating my requests, hired him under favorable conditions. To avoid any gratitude, I kept my connection with the CEO confidential, asking both Ted and the CEO to do the same. Sensing something was wrong after the earlier call, I contacted the CEO, and we rushed over together. The CEO said, I'm here to speak with you. Let me in, and walked into the in-laws' home. The father-in-law stood there, stunned and speechless, as I tried to follow. Holly's mother-in-law emerged from a room and blocked my path. You have no right to come in. The CEO quickly countered, No, she's with me. The in-laws appeared visibly shaken and terrified. Grandma, over here. Help Mommy, Lynn's voice called out urgently. At that moment, Lynn rushed over and tugged at my hand. Lynn, you become so skinny. I noticed that my granddaughter looked much more gaunt than the last time I had seen her. Before I could voice my concern, Lynn urgently guided me towards the back of the house, leading me to a storage room under the stairs. Holly, in a place like this? I quickly opened the door and gasped in shock and sorrow. There inside the dimly lit room was my emaciated daughter Holly. Mom, Holly murmured with drowsy eyes and tears streaming down her face. I gripped her frail hand tightly. I'm so relieved you're okay. Lynn told me you'd collapsed. We need to get you to a doctor right away. As I gently tried to lift Holly, the CEO stepped in to help. She doesn't need to see a doctor. Given her condition, are you really sure about that? We haven't done anything wrong, I responded, concerned. Liars, Mom always worked hard while you both just relaxed. You only gave her a small amount of food, and she even gave her own portion to me. From a recent call with my granddaughter, I learned that since moving in together, Holly had been forced to handle all the household chores from morning till night, like a servant. Despite Holly's efforts to please what she thought were her beloved husband's parents, they criticized her relentlessly. They complained about her cooking, her cleaning, and her parenting. They punished her by cutting back her meals and would say, "If you can't do things properly, you belong in the storeroom." They even confiscated her mobile phone, purse, and bank book. Whenever she protested, they threatened to harm Lynn. I was horrified to discover this. Holly was enduring this abuse with her already limited food further reduced, all for Lynn's sake. Overwhelmed by constant unjust criticism and suffering from physical and mental exhaustion, Holly was unable to think clearly. "Why are you acting like the victim? We only scolded her a little. This is a serious matter. She could be in a life-threatening condition. I intend to get a medical report." "Don't exaggerate. Stay out of our family matters. It's a new. Holly is my cherished daughter, and so is Lynn. I can forgive you for what you've done to them." At that moment, Holly, clearly exhausted, suddenly broke down in tears. "Mom, please stop. I'm afraid Ted will hate me." "Holly, did he say something to you?" "He said he'd leave me and stop providing financial support." "That's strange. I just spoke with Ted, and he mentioned that he's been sending $3,500 every month." At this revelation, the defiant expressions of my in-laws shifted to visible anxiety. "It looks like you've been keeping the money Ted sent Holly for yourselves. You've been deceiving everyone. Does this mean the rumor about Ted having another girlfriend is also false? How could you drive Holly to this point? I will never forgive you for this." At that moment, the sound of the ambulance sirens approached, and the CEO went outside to direct the paramedics. As soon as he was out of sight, my father-in-law's demeanor shifted dramatically, and he gave me a cold, piercing stare. "It's our son's money. Naturally, we have the right to use it. There's no reason for us to give it to a daughter-in-law like you. If you can't accept that, you should take the child and leave." "So, this is why you've been harassing me almost every day, isn't it?" "Did you hear that, Ted?" I spoke into my smartphone. I was on a call with Holly's husband, Ted, and relaying every word his parents were saying. "What are you talking about?" I turned the smartphone screen towards the in-laws with the speakerphone on. "I will never forgive you for what you've done to my beloved family, my wife and child. I'm cutting off all support from now on." Ted's voice was filled with anger, and his parents could only tremble in response. My father-in-law bowed deeply towards the phone. "Ted, I'm so sorry. We needed the money and didn't mean any harm. This isn't a joke. I'll be home soon, so be prepared." The CEO, returning with the paramedics, added sternly, "There's no point in keeping such a ruthless man employed. I brought him in for Wendy's sake, but he's been a disappointment." Upon hearing this, the in-laws immediately shifted their demeanor, bowing and apologizing profusely to me. "We apologize for how we've treated Holly. We're struggling financially and desperately need your help. Could you please talk to Ted and the CEO on our behalf?" "You must be joking. How can I forgive you? I'm reporting everything to the police." As I watched the paramedics carefully place Holly onto a stretcher, I offered a reassuring smile to my granddaughter. "Lynn, you did wonderfully. You saved your mom. We'll go to the hospital now, and then we can rest at Grandma's house." "Thank you, Grandma." At the hospital, both my daughter and granddaughter were diagnosed with malnutrition. Lynn was discharged the same day, but Holly, deeply traumatized, needed to be hospitalized for further treatment. Ted returned briefly to be with his wife and daughter, and his presence helped restore Lynn's smile and brought signs of recovery to Holly. I felt a profound sense of relief. As for the in-laws, they faced legal consequences after a thorough police investigation. The CEO had recorded their actions, which confirmed severe abuse. Since their home was rented, they were evicted, and a claim for $47,000 was filed, $30,000 for embezzlement, and $17,000 for damages. Thanks to my connections with the CEO and reliable childhood friends, the in-laws will be required to repay the amount by working at a specific factory after their prison term. For now, the three of us are enjoying a peaceful time together, eagerly awaiting Ted's return. Once he's back, we plan to move in together at my place. I'm looking forward to a brighter future, supporting my daughter and son-in-law, and cherishing the joyful moments with my granddaughter. In a heartbeat, my world was shattered when my husband's voice, cold and harsh, blared through the phone. "Why do you always fall apart when I need you?" he scolded, seemingly blind to the urgency that had sent me rushing to the hospital, with our unborn child's safety hanging in the balance. "We're starving here, waiting for your awful cooking, while you're off lounging in the hospital," he went on, his tone completely devoid of empathy. He announced he'd had enough and was going out to eat with his parents, leaving me to find my own way home. His frustration pierced through the phone, blaming me for a crisis I had no control over, and only deepening my fear and worry for our unborn child, whom I was desperately trying to protect. I was once a dedicated cosmetic salesperson, known for my passion and commitment, with a collection of awards and a stellar reputation to prove it. My job fueled my confidence and was a source of immense pride. Meeting my husband felt like a fairy tale come true, leading to a whirlwind romance and marriage. However, the joy of discovering I was pregnant brought a difficult decision: leaving my job to reduce the risk of miscarriage, a choice I made for the sake of our family's future. As I faced the challenges of pregnancy, my husband's support began to dwindle. What had started as shared excitement soon turned into frustration. Simple tasks that once seemed easy now felt monumental, and my efforts to meet his expectations often fell short. "Where's my lunch?" he would ask, only to dismiss the simple sandwiches I managed to make, criticizing my sensitivity to smells. His words were cutting. Pregnancy is not an illness, belittling my struggles and leaving me to fend for myself. This change in his behavior was a stark contrast to the man I had fallen in love with. His presence at doctor's appointments dwindled, and his empathy for the household chores, which now felt overwhelming to me, seemed to vanish. Our home, once a sanctuary of mutual respect and love, was increasingly feeling like a battleground. I was left trying to protect not only my own well-being but also the health of our unborn child, desperately hoping that we might find our way back to understanding and support. Maybe he's just worn out, I told myself. He had recently taken on a mentorship role for a new colleague, which had been quite demanding. This could be why he seemed more impatient and irritable with me lately. I reassured myself that once our baby arrived, his busy schedule would settle, and we'd find our groove as a family. "It's going to be all right," I murmured, gently stroking my growing belly, clinging to hope despite the challenges of my changing body and the strain in our relationship. Unfortunately, things between my husband and me haven't improved. To make matters worse, my in-laws have begun dropping by unannounced, heightening my stress levels. They've scrutinized the cleanliness of our home and voiced concerns about how we'd cope once the baby arrived. Despite their criticisms, they expected immediate hospitality and demanded I whip up something for them on the spot. Caught off guard and unprepared, I felt overwhelmed and judged for not being a better host. Each visit ended with their disappointment, and my husband consistently sided with them, never defending me. Despite my best efforts, I felt perpetually inadequate in their eyes. During one of these visits, I was sent out to buy groceries despite being heavily pregnant. The strain proved too much, and I collapsed. When I woke up in the hospital, I learned that I had fainted from overexertion, but thankfully, our baby was still safe. The doctors advised a few days of rest in the hospital. I saw missed calls from my husband on my phone and realized he must have been worried when I didn't return from the store. However, when I finally called him back, hoping to hear concern or relief in his voice, I was met with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone harsh and unforgiving, as if my health and our baby's safety were insignificant. His words left me shivering, feeling both hurt and abandoned. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to explain. "I collapsed at the grocery store and was taken to the hospital. They have me on IV fluids and want me to stay here for a few days for observation." But his response was cold and dismissive, as if my well-being was secondary to his own inconvenience. "You collapsed, and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer my calls? You're so slow." His harsh words stung, and I dreaded the thought of our unborn child being exposed to such negativity. "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," I pleaded, but my request for compassion fell on deaf ears. He remained unrelenting, indifferent to my plea for kindness. "We're starving here, waiting for your terrible cooking, and you're just lounging in the hospital," he said, his voice dripping with anger and lacking any trace of concern. His clear intention to go out with his parents and leave me to manage on my own, despite my condition, was crushing. His harsh words made me flinch, and not wanting to expose my baby to any more negativity, I ended the call, feeling profoundly alone and disheartened. As I returned to my hospital room, tears began to flow uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, a comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see Helen, a customer I had grown close to during my time as a cosmetic salesperson, offering me a towel. Recognizing her immediately, a wave of relief and warmth washed over me. "Helen, Is it really you? I'm so glad you remember me, she said with a warm smile. Our unexpected reunion felt like a twist of fate, a much-needed reminder of kindness and human connection during my darkest hour. Helen had been more than just a customer. After a painful divorce, she had lost her self-confidence and stopped wearing makeup altogether. I vividly recalled the day I approached her at the cosmetics counter, offering to help her try some new products. The transformation in her appearance was more than just physical. It marked a moment of emotional healing and a step towards regaining her self-esteem. Over time, Helen became more than a client, she became a friend. But 5 years before I left my job, she had suddenly stopped coming, and I had always wondered what had happened to her. Now, here she was, a beacon of support at a time when I needed it most. I had come back hoping to reconnect with you, Helen, she said, her voice tinged with surprise and disappointment. When I visited your old workplace, I was taken aback to learn that you had left. I'm sorry for dropping in so unexpectedly, Helen explained with a chuckle. I've been working abroad, running a business, and it's been incredibly busy. It's been ages since I've had the chance to enjoy America and its cuisine, so I decided to come back once things calmed down a bit. And of course, right after I tried to find you, I ended up here with appendicitis. Her laughter brought a sense of lightness to the situation despite the circumstances. It's only in the early stages, so medication should sort it out. And honestly, if this had happened while I was still abroad, the treatment costs would have been sky high. In a way, I'm relieved it happened here, Helen continued, her optimism and familiar smile proving as infectious as ever. This unexpected reunion lifted my spirits, and we began to joyfully reminisce about the past. As our conversation grew more heartfelt, Helen, with her ever-kind smile, gently inquired, "You don't have to share if you're not comfortable, but I noticed you seemed upset earlier. Is everything all right?" Feeling a deep trust in Helen, not just as a former customer but as a true friend, I felt compelled to open up. I opened up to Helen about the difficulties I was facing with my husband and in-laws. "I'm really concerned about bringing my child into this environment," I admitted. "I'm afraid they'll face the same treatment I do. And now, without my job, the thought of living independently, especially with a child, feels overwhelming." To my surprise, Helen made an incredibly generous offer. "I actually have an apartment that you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I developed on some inherited land. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's in a safe neighborhood close to supermarkets and a police station. There's no need for a deposit at the moment, and you can start paying rent whenever you're ready. It's a really good deal. What do you think?" Helen's enthusiasm was unmistakable, and her offer was so genuine it made me laugh in disbelief. "Are you sure you can offer it at such favorable terms?" I asked, deeply moved by her kindness. "Absolutely," Helen replied with a warm smile. "I trust you to take great care of the place, and I think it's crucial to support each other during tough times. You're more than welcome to stay there," she assured me, her generosity evident. Helen's unexpected kindness was a beacon of hope, providing not just a place to stay but a chance for a fresh start. Eager to support someone she valued, Helen offered her apartment, an act of generosity I couldn't turn down. With heartfelt gratitude, I accepted her offer. Days later, after receiving the doctor's approval, I left the hospital and moved straight into the apartment Helen had prepared for me. Her remarkable generosity was evident in how effortlessly she had arranged everything over the phone. I didn't go back to the home I had shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this fresh start in Helen's warm and cozy apartment. Despite feeling guilty for not paying rent immediately, Helen reassured me with a laugh, insisting there was no rush. While my husband was at work, I quietly returned to our old home to gather my belongings, only to realize how little there truly felt like mine. The house seemed as empty as the ache in my heart within its walls. Helen's support extended beyond the apartment. She introduced me to a lawyer who had previously assisted her, reinforcing my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement became a beacon of hope, and as each hospital visit confirmed the health of my growing baby, my resolve only grew stronger. During one such visit, as I stepped outside, my heart sank when I saw my husband waiting for me. Panic surged through me, and despite my best efforts to flee, my pregnancy slowed me down. He confronted me about the lawyer and our new living situation, gripping my arm tightly. I stood my ground, insisting that any discussions about the divorce, compensation, or child support be handled through the lawyer. His demands for me to return and his refusal to provide support were met with my firm refusal. As my husband tried to drag me back, a young woman intervened. Her name was Rebecca, and she was clearly familiar with my husband. Stepping in front of me with a protective stance, Rebecca's presence shifted the dynamic of the confrontation. The tension between her and my husband was palpable, but Rebecca stood firm, refusing to let him take me against my will. Her resolve, coupled with the implied threat of calling the police, gave me a glimmer of hope and the courage to assert myself in the face of this unexpected conflict. When my husband heard the mention of the police, he looked alarmed and quickly left. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief that made my legs go weak. Rebecca quickly moved to my side, offering support. "Are you okay?" she asked gently as I apologized, expressing how grateful I was for her help. Without hesitation, Rebecca called a taxi for me, insisting on ensuring I got home safely. Despite feeling guilty for causing her trouble, she reassured me it was no bother. When I shared my address, Rebecca was surprised to discover that I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, with her cheerful and caring demeanor, turned out to be a new employee at my husband George's workplace. She had reported George's inappropriate behavior, which led to his removal as her mentor. George was notorious for his lack of empathy towards female employees, often making insensitive remarks about personal matters like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca's experiences echoed my own, highlighting the troubling behavior I had endured from him during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after our meeting, Rebecca and I had become good friends, enjoying dinners together and sharing our lives. She informed me that George had been transferred to a subsidiary company following numerous complaints and issues at work. It turned out that Rebecca was the daughter of Helen, the successful businesswoman who managed several properties, including the apartment I was staying in. George had previously boasted about handling Helen's account, but his behavior ultimately led to a reassessment of his professional standing. Helen had advocated for George's transfer after uncovering his misconduct both at work and towards me. Rebecca, resourceful and determined, had tackled workplace issues independently without leaning on her mother's influence. However, upon discovering my connection to Helen, she felt a stronger sense of duty to act. Helen encouraged Rebecca to compile all evidence against George, which contributed to his transfer. With George now facing reduced income and an increased workload, his situation had markedly changed. Helen's advice to me, drawing on her extensive experience, was to remain resolute and not be swayed by any attempts George might make to elicit sympathy. Her guidance was a source of great reassurance, coming from someone with such expertise and understanding. After deciding to divorce George, he attempted to reach out through our lawyer, expressing how challenging work had been and how much he missed me. He even apologized and pleaded for a chance to reconcile, but I remained resolute in my decision to proceed with the divorce. Supported by Helen, George ultimately had no choice but to accept the divorce terms and agree to pay child support and damages over time. My next significant hurdle was dealing with my in-laws, particularly my father-in-law, who was overly eager about the baby being a boy. I could sense trouble brewing, and my concerns were soon validated. One day, as I was about to leave, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. Having followed Rebecca in an attempt to confront her, he instead found me. He demanded that I surrender the baby once born, insisting that the child was the family's heir. Despite my efforts to escape, his grip was firm and unyielding. Just then, a commanding voice cut through the tension, demanding my father-in-law release me. Before I could react, Rebecca executed a precise judo move, sending him sprawling to the ground. It turned out that Rebecca, a top-ranked judoka with national titles, had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother during challenging times. She confronted my father-in-law, condemning him for ignoring George's behavior and trying to interfere in my life. Rebecca firmly defended my right to move forward, making it clear that any interference was unacceptable. As the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, I realized Rebecca had called for help before stepping in to rescue me. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting nearby in the car, observed silently as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law into custody. In the aftermath, my father-in-law was arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law chose to divorce him. She decided to start anew, moving back to the countryside to live a life free from external pressures. despite George's pleas to accompany her. Expressing his frustration with his job and the legal battles, she firmly refused, prioritizing her own fresh start over his desires. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law reached out to offer her apologies and left a sum of money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained that it's not uncommon for people to feel loss after a divorce, and the money was likely her mother-in-law's way of apologizing and supporting my son's future. Although her past behavior had been troubling, I was touched by her effort to make amends and appreciated the support. Following the finalization of the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My mother-in-law chose to settle in the countryside, preferring a life of solitude over remaining with George. When my father-in-law was eventually released, he found that the house had been demolished by my mother-in-law before her departure. Left with few options, he moved in with George, which only added to their difficulties and contributed to George's resignation from his job due to his tarnished reputation. Despite the challenges, the child support payments continued to arrive reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca, recognized for her hard work, advanced to a project leader role, earning admiration from her colleagues. Helen's ventures, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son grew a bit older, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. Helen remained a steadfast supporter, showering my son with affection as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us, her presence a comforting reminder of the strength and kindness that had carried me through the toughest times. Inspired by these remarkable women, I was determined to be equally strong and protective of my son, embracing the support and resilience they had shown me. Hello, I'm Patricia, a 34-year-old navigating the everyday challenges of work and motherhood. For most of my life, romance took a backseat, but as I entered my 30s, my parents grew increasingly concerned about my single status. That's when they introduced me to William. He seemed like the perfect match, devoted to his family, which aligned with my own values. We got married, and for a while, it felt like a real-life fairy tale. However, 8 months into our marriage, everything changed. One day, William called me multiple times, sounding utterly drained. When I finally reached him, he delivered devastating news. His father, Paul, had collapsed at home and was rushed to the hospital. Tragically, Paul passed away, leaving a significant void in our lives, especially for William's mother, who was now alone in her grief. William stepped up, dedicating his time to her, taking her out, and planning trips to help her cope. Then, I won a trip to Hawaii through a contest. Instead of viewing it as a chance for us to reconnect and heal, William seized the moment to manipulate me. He insisted that unless I let him and his mother go on the trip without me, he would threaten divorce. His mother appeared to be perfectly fine with this arrangement, while I felt sidelined and used. Determined not to be undermined, I decided to stand my ground. I wouldn't just accept their plans without a fight. This situation revealed an unexpected side of William, one willing to use emotional blackmail to get what he wanted. It was disheartening, but it also strengthened my resolve to confront the dynamics of our relationship and prioritize my own happiness. While he didn't completely neglect me, whenever our plans conflicted with his commitments to his mother, he always chose her. His typical responses were, "Sorry, Patricia, Mom needs me," or "We planned this with Mom a long time ago." I outwardly agreed, but inside, I simmered with frustration. Why was I always the one bending? Wasn't his mother being too demanding? Despite these issues, William's closeness to her was undeniable, and aside from this tension, our marriage seemed stable. I convinced myself that this was just the norm for some families. In the midst of it all, I found solace in crossword puzzles that offered prizes. It became my escape during the times William was occupied with his mom. Occasionally, I even won gift cards or meals, which were nice bonuses. Then one day, I struck gold. I won 2 tickets to Hawaii. I was ecstatic, double-checking the win multiple times before considering travel arrangements. Initially, I thought about inviting William but hesitated, knowing his tendency to include his mother in our plans. After some reflection, I decided the tickets would be a perfect gift for my parents. On my way home, I stopped by their house to share the exciting news. Bursting with joy, I exclaimed, "Mom, guess what? I won tickets to Hawaii." Her eyes lit up with surprise and happiness. "Wow, that's fantastic. You and William must be thrilled," she replied. I paused for a moment, then said, "Actually, I want you and Dad to have them. I said, watching as my mom's expression shifted from astonishment to warmth, clearly touched by my gesture. Her voice, filled with surprise and delight, asked, "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I replied. "William travels enough as it is. I want you and Dad to enjoy this opportunity." My mom's face lit up with joy, but I noticed a flicker of concern on Dad's face. "What's wrong?" I asked, catching his worried expression. "Well, it's a busy time of year at the company. I'm not sure I can take time off right now," he explained apologetically. "That's unfortunate," I sighed, feeling a mix of disappointment and understanding. Then Dad brightened with a suggestion. "Why not take Amy instead? It was your prize originally, right? You should go and have some quality time together." Mom nodded enthusiastically, clearly excited by the idea. "That sounds wonderful." Feeling a renewed sense of excitement, I applied for leave the next day, and it was quickly approved. I called the airline to arrange for the tickets to be used by Amy and me. On my way home from work, I stopped by a bookstore to pick up a guidebook for Hawaii. It had been ages since Mom and I had traveled together, and I was genuinely looking forward to it. When I arrived home, expecting the house to be empty, I was surprised to find the lights on. I had assumed William was still out, but instead of his shoes, I saw a familiar pair of women's shoes by the entrance. Puzzled, I walked in to find Kelly emerging from the living room. "Patricia, do you know what time it is?" she scolded as soon as she saw me. "Oh, Kelly, I didn't realize you were here," I replied, taken aback by her tone. "It's not just about me being here. It's late and William will be back soon," she continued, her voice sharp with reproach. "I'm sorry. I'll start on dinner right away," I apologized, rushing toward the kitchen. But Kelly wasn't finished. She launched into a critique of my absence, making it clear she expected more from me in managing the household. Her words stung, reminding me of the tightening boundaries in my life that I was increasingly determined to push back against. With a heavy sigh, Kelly questioned my commitment as a daughter-in-law, attributing my perceived shortcomings to my job. According to her, my priorities should place home far ahead of work. She often used her spare key to drop in unannounced, especially since she lived close by. Kelly clung to outdated notions about a daughter-in-law's role, expecting me to serve William and his family without objection. Her persistent critiques made it harder for me to feel any warmth toward her. As I unpacked groceries and began preparing dinner, Kelly's voice pierced the air with sudden urgency. "Wait, what's this? Patricia, are you planning a trip to Hawaii?" She had stumbled upon the guidebook. I had just purchased a few things when I noticed Kelly rummaging through my belongings. "Why are you going through my things?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "That's not the point. Why are you planning a trip to Hawaii?" she demanded sharply. "I won the trip in a contest and was planning to give it to my mom," I explained, trying to keep my cool. "I haven't heard anything about this. Why should I?" Kelly snapped back, her demeanor confrontational. Before our argument could escalate, William walked in. Kelly wasted no time informing him of her discovery, pointing at me with an accusatory finger. "Patricia is being thoughtless," she exclaimed. William turned to me, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "I won the trip and wanted to give it to my parents. Since Dad can't go, I thought Mom could go with me," I replied calmly, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Why didn't you discuss this with me first?" William asked, confusion and irritation in his tone. "It's my prize, William," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "What's the big deal? You always travel with Kelly." "It's not the same. Mom and I only take trips within the country. We haven't traveled abroad in years." William countered, his voice rising. "How could you decide this without talking to me?" He slammed his hand on a table, cutting me off. "You're getting too bold for a daughter-in-law. Mom and I are going, and you're staying home." His words made me wince with their childishness. "Wait a minute. You've had enough of this trip," I said, trying to keep my composure. "If you're not happy about it, maybe we should talk about divorce." I couldn't believe I had just said that over something so trivial. It felt utterly ridiculous, but my anger flared. "I won this trip fair and square. I've already decided to give it to my mom. Can't you see the signs? For once, Mom wants to go. When does it end with you always putting Kelly first? You never consider how I feel," I exclaimed, frustration bubbling over. "I don't care how you feel. This trip is for me and Mom. You stay home and behave," William insisted coldly, his dismissive tone chilling my affection for him. It was clear that I ranked lower than Kelly in his priorities, and I couldn't keep dealing with this ridiculous dynamic. Fine, do what you want and enjoy your trip. You should have listened in the first place, I replied calmly, trying to keep my composure. Do what you want, William retorted dismissively, a far cry from the caring person I once knew. Meanwhile, Kelly looked smug and victorious, relishing the turn of events. Needing space, I resolved to leave the house while they were away on their trip. The distance would give me time to think and perhaps figure out how to navigate this deepening rift. I decided to let William and Kelly go ahead with their vacation plans. The next day, I called the airline to transfer the tickets to William and his mother. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn. The airline representative sounded concerned as they informed me, "I'm sorry, but once the participants are confirmed, we can't change them." "Is that so?" I asked, a wave of disappointment washing over me. "Yes, and this ticket requires the actual winner to be one of the travelers. So if it's your husband and mother-in-law, the ticket won't be valid," the operator explained. "So if I don't go, the ticket is useless," I clarified, seeking confirmation. "Exactly. Please check the documents we sent you. They mentioned this condition," they advised. After reviewing the documents, it became clear that only I, the winner, could use the ticket, and it couldn't be transferred. I decided not to tell William and Kelly right away. Instead, I made plans for them to travel at their own expense if they chose to do so. That evening, after returning from work, I casually brought up the Hawaii trip to gauge William's thoughts. "So, how about that trip?" I started. "Did you talk to the airline? Are Mom and I all set to go?" he asked eagerly, excitement evident in his voice. "I did call them," I said, handing over the winning documents along with the tickets. "Here are the documents and the tickets." "I only need the tickets," William replied dismissively, waving off the papers. "But there might be important details in there, especially since it's an international trip," I suggested, hinting at the necessity of understanding the ticket conditions. "I don't think I need to. Mom and I are just excited about the trip." He brushed off my concerns, his focus solely on the upcoming vacation. As William skimmed over the importance of reading the fine print, I felt a mix of frustration and resignation. It was clear that he was overlooking crucial details that could affect the trip's feasibility. "I've got it covered. We're efficient, unlike you," he retorted dismissively. "Fine, whatever. I'll leave them here just in case," I replied, placing the documents on the table, knowing William might overlook the vital information they contained. As expected, on the day of their trip, after making sure William had left, I packed my bags and headed to my parents' house for a quiet stay. While unpacking, the anticipated call from William came through. As soon as I picked up, he burst out, "Hey, what's going on? They're saying the ticket can't be used." "That's right. If the winner doesn't go, the ticket is invalid," I explained calmly, trying to keep the conversation neutral. "What? Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" William demanded, confusion and frustration in his voice. "I did tell you, remember? I mentioned it might be a good idea to read the instructions," I reminded him, hoping he'd recall our earlier conversation. "You mean it was written in those documents you gave me?" William asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Exactly. It's your fault for not reading," I replied, maintaining my composure despite his growing agitation. "So how are we supposed to get to Hawaii?" he asked, his tone becoming more heated. "Well, the operator did mention that if the winner doesn't go, you'll have to pay the full price," I said matter-of-factly. William sounded frantic, and I could hear Kelly's voice in the background, signaling their shared distress. "William, what did Patricia say?" Kelly demanded. "Mommy, if Patricia doesn't go, we have to pay for the trip," William started to explain, his voice tinged with disbelief before handing the phone to Kelly. "Let me talk to her," she insisted, ready to take over the conversation, presumably to find a way out of their predicament. "I can't deal with this anymore," Kelly snapped sharply. I decided to let them sort it out themselves and hung up without another word. It wasn't long before William called back. "Hello," I answered, bracing myself for more drama. "What is it now?" "I'm busy," I said coldly, not in the mood for further complications. "It's not what you think. I tried to buy the tickets, but the credit card isn't working," he explained, sounding flustered. "Huh? I don't know anything about your card," I replied, genuinely puzzled. "It's not mine, it's your card," William clarified. "Oh, so you're saying you used my card without my permission?" I accused, my tone icy. "I just need to fix it now," he insisted. "When I checked my wallet that morning, my card was missing. I had a hunch and immediately froze it." I realize why you're having issues, I said, understanding dawning on me. I knew you stole it, William retorted angrily. Are you kidding me? I was planning to shop with that card abroad. I shot back, my frustration mounting. You freaking witch, he snapped, his voice harsh and unrepentant about taking the trip or using my card without permission. Fed up with his selfish behavior, I coldly rebuked him. What a jerk. Who are you calling a witch? After mocking others all the time, you should just go to hell. What? Who are you talking to like that? William asked, sounding offended and taken aback. Honestly, calling out for mommy is creepy, I replied, highlighting the oddness of his dependency. This situation had escalated beyond simple travel plans and revealed deeper issues in our relationship. If you love your mom so much, maybe you two should just stay together. I can't handle being married to a mama's boy. There's no point in us staying together, I declared, my voice heavy with exasperation. Hey, calm down. If you keep this up, we'll end up getting a divorce, William threatened, his tone sharp. Fine by me. I was thinking the same thing, I retorted, my mind made up. I'm leaving the house and don't plan to come back. Enjoy your time abroad with your beloved mommy. Hope you both have a great trip, I added sarcastically before hanging up, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Furious, I ended the call and immediately blocked William and his mother on all my devices. Following my dad's advice, I went to a law firm to start the process of ending my marriage. As I reviewed our finances to divide our assets, I discovered our joint account was empty. William had withdrawn money multiple times, coinciding with his trips with his mom. It was clear he had used our savings for their travels and had also swiped my credit card without my permission. I demanded significant compensation, which left him owing money and being pursued by creditors. His once indulgent mother, who had always gotten what she wanted, now found herself in a strained relationship with William. They argued every time they met, a stark contrast to their previous closeness. It was ironic how things turned out, considering how spoiled he used to be. Meanwhile, I decided to stay with my parents for a while. The ordeal had caused them to worry, and I wanted to make it up to them by living with and taking care of them. Being away from the chaos of my marriage made me realize that what truly matters is having a loving, supportive family. Going through this divorce reaffirmed that belief, helping me rediscover what was truly important. Hello, I'm Amy, a 37-year-old woman who's been navigating a whirlwind of changes over the past few months. It's been a period of learning, growth, and adapting to new realities. This chapter of my life began with a string of challenges, mostly centered around my husband, Daniel. However, amidst the chaos, I was fortunate to have someone truly kind step in, like a guardian angel at the perfect moment, offering me support when I needed it most. But before I dive into the heart of it all, let me introduce a key figure in my life, my younger sister, Hannah. She's 5 years younger than me and undeniably beautiful. Growing up, our relationship was complicated. I was the bookish one, while Hannah was the social butterfly, always the center of attention. It led to constant friction between us, partly fueled by jealousy, I think. Despite our mom's efforts to keep the peace, our sibling rivalry was a persistent theme. Things didn't really improve until I went off to college, and as we both matured, we found some common ground. We never became particularly close, but we reached a place of peaceful coexistence, which was enough for me. Then there's Daniel, my ex-husband. We met at work and hit it off right away. After 2 years of dating, we decided to get married. We both worked hard, and together, we were able to buy our first home. Although I was the primary breadwinner and the mortgage was in my name, it still felt like a shared accomplishment. A couple of years into our marriage, Daniel brought up the idea of starting a family. He painted this picture of a warm, happy life with kids. I had my reservations, but he was persistent, and eventually, I came around to the idea. Soon, we were blessed with our son, and 2 years later, our daughter followed. In the beginning, Daniel was an engaged and hands-on father, but over time, his enthusiasm waned. Before I realized it, the full weight of running our household and caring for our children had shifted onto me. The support Daniel once promised seemed to fade, leaving me to manage everything on my own. When Daniel received a major promotion and his salary surpassed mine, I made the difficult decision to leave my job. It wasn't an easy choice, and although I resisted for a while, I eventually gave in, deciding it wasn't worth the battle. To fill the emptiness and keep myself busy, I discovered a love for hosting dinner parties. My guests often included my mom, my sister, who lived nearby, and sometimes my mother-in-law, Alexis, when she came to visit. Slowly, I found contentment in this new phase of life, relishing the extra time with my family and feeling at peace with where things stood between Daniel and me. Our relationship had its challenges, especially after the traumatic birth of our second child, an experience that nearly cost me my life. It took a toll on us, but I didn't fully grasp the depth of our issues until one day, while cleaning, I found a pair of unfamiliar panties. The discovery shattered me, filling me with doubts about my worth as a partner. Even though it had been over a year since the birth, and I had been working through the emotional aftermath in therapy, finding those panties made it painfully clear that my struggles and efforts had gone unnoticed by Daniel. Betrayal and anger quickly replaced my shock, and I became determined to uncover the truth behind his infidelity. My first move was to confront Daniel with a picture of the underwear, demanding answers. After that, I started searching through his laptop and social media accounts, hoping to find something incriminating. At first, I came up empty, which only added to my confusion. Desperate for clarity, I meticulously combed through every message, even though I thought it would be futile. I knew all of his contacts. The idea that someone close to me could betray me felt absurd, until I noticed my sister's name appearing repeatedly. At first, I dismissed it, unable to fathom her involvement in anything inappropriate. However, as I delved deeper into their conversations, my world came crashing down. The messages were filled with intimate photos, loving exchanges, and plans for Daniel to leave me. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me reeling from the staggering depth of their betrayal. Discovering my sister's involvement in such a shocking betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow. Despite our tumultuous history, I never imagined she would cross such a line. My initial reaction was visceral. I was so disgusted by the revelation that I felt physically ill. When I tried to reach Daniel but got no response, I turned to Hannah, desperate for some explanation. Our conversation was surreal. Her nonchalant attitude and justifications for her actions with Daniel were beyond my comprehension. She claimed she was doing me a favor by relieving me of his attention so I could focus more on our children. The absurdity of her reasoning only deepened my disbelief. Hannah attempted to downplay the situation, insisting that she succumbed to Daniel's advances because she thought it was best for him. Her complete lack of remorse was the final straw, and I ended the call, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. The aftermath left me engulfed in despair. As I cared for my youngest child, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. The daily routines felt hollow as I wrestled with the emotional fallout from the betrayal of 3 people I once trusted. Putting on a brave face for my children was increasingly difficult, especially when they asked about their father's absence and I had no honest answers to provide. As day turned to night and Daniel's absence became more concerning, my anxiety deepened. My attempts to contact both Daniel and Hannah were met with silence, amplifying my feelings of isolation and dread. Exhausted and overwhelmed by everything that had happened, I clung to the hope that sleep might offer a temporary escape from the harsh reality. Yet, when I awoke to a lingering sense of unease, it became clear that this ordeal was far from over. As I looked around the room that morning, the absence of Daniel's belongings hit me like a lead weight. A frantic search through the house confirmed my worst fears. Everything of his was gone, except for the most trivial items. It felt as if he had simply vanished into thin air, choosing to flee rather than confront our issues. In the midst of this shock, my foremost concern was for our children. They were my top priority. After getting them through their morning routines and ensuring they were taken care of, I found myself standing at my mom's doorstep, the weight of my situation pressing down on me. My mother, always perceptive, immediately sensed my distress. Lost in my thoughts, I struggled with the reality of single parenthood and the daunting future that lay ahead. Finally, it was time to break the silence and share the tumultuous events with her. I shared the painful details of discovering the affair, Daniel's sudden departure, and the gut-wrenching realization that my sister, Hannah, was involved. My mother's shock mirrored my own as I recounted how I uncovered the betrayal, an action I would typically never take, but one I felt compelled to pursue given the circumstances. Revealing Hannah's role in this betrayal was both surreal and excruciating. Her indifferent response when I confronted her, claiming she was merely doing what she thought was best for Daniel, was a bitter pill to swallow. My mother's reaction, a mix of disbelief and sorrow, provided little comfort as we grappled with the harsh reality of the situation. As I confided in my mother about Daniel and Hannah's affair, I braced myself for the daunting challenge of raising 3 children on my own. I knew that support from my family would be vital, but the road ahead felt riddled with uncertainty and heartache. My mom urged me to take some time to rest while she processed the shocking news I had just shared. Her presence felt like a lifeline, offering a glimmer of peace amidst the chaos. Overwhelmed and numb from everything that had happened, I managed to drift off to sleep while she cared for my youngest. However, my rest was abruptly interrupted by the sound of crying and my mom's raised voice. I rushed to see what was wrong, only to find her hanging up after what seemed to be a heated phone call, likely having given Hannah a piece of her mind for her actions. In the days that followed, my mom moved in to help, easing the logistical challenges and providing the emotional support I desperately needed. When Hannah tried to reach out, my mom firmly insisted that I block her, reinforcing my feelings of betrayal during a time when I felt utterly alone. The revelation from friends that Daniel and Hannah had quickly married after he left us struck me like a fresh wound, adding a sharp sting to my already aching heart. It was a bitter pill to swallow, leading to awkward and painful conversations with concerned friends who offered their support and, in solidarity, chose to sever ties with Daniel and Hannah. My mom's reaction to their marriage unveiled a side of her that was rarely seen. Known for her gentle nature, her fury at the news highlighted the depth of her love and protective instinct for us. Her offer of financial support and assistance in finding job opportunities was a testament to her unwavering commitment, guiding us through this challenging transition. As the kids asked questions about Daniel, maintaining my composure became a struggle. Yet we persevered together, strengthened by our resilience and love for one another. A week into our new reality, I received a letter from Daniel. I hesitated, suspecting it was an apology that I wasn't ready to face. The weight of everything we had endured hung heavily on my shoulders as I considered the next steps for myself and my children, supported by my mother's steadfast presence. Choosing not to read Daniel's letter felt like my way of finding closure. A week was far too generous for any attempts at reconciliation, especially after he had chosen to leave us in silence, a decision that spoke volumes about his cowardice. In a moment of defiance, I tore up the letter. Yet curiosity lingered. I often found myself wondering what it contained, but I quickly reminded myself that no words from him could ever undo the harm he had caused. The following day, in an effort to bring some joy back into our lives, my mom and I took the kids to the fair. It was a much-needed break from the heaviness that had been lingering over us. Amidst the laughter and excitement, I found myself genuinely smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. That night, as my mom and I relaxed with a bottle of wine, I decided to mention the letter. "I got something in the mail last night," I started, my voice tentative. "Oh, what was it?" my mom asked, her curiosity evident. "A letter from Daniel," I confessed. "And what did it say?" she asked, leaning closer. "I have no idea," I admitted. "You didn't open it," she replied, taken aback. "No, I couldn't face any of his excuses, so I just burned it," I explained, a mix of defiance and regret bubbling inside me. My mom paused, her expression serious. "Amy, what if it was something important, like official divorce papers?" I brushed off her concern. The envelope hadn't seemed official at all. "I'm sure it was nothing like that." "Okay, if you're certain. But what do you think he might have said?" she asked gently. "I don't know. Maybe a half-hearted apology or a request for his things back," I speculated, trying to push away the nagging what-ifs. The conversation shifted away from the letter as we focused on the brighter moments of our evening, yet the unacknowledged presence of what could have been lingered, an unwelcome guest amidst the remnants of our past. Navigating through everything has been a roller coaster, but the moments of joy at the fair offered a glimpse of hope. The hardest part comes when the kids ask about their dad's whereabouts. Finding the right words is always a struggle. Although things are gradually improving, it's a slow process. My mom's steadfast support has been my anchor throughout this tumultuous time. During our conversation, she shared her intentions to disown Hannah, vowing that her support and inheritance would be dedicated solely to me and my children. This decision, stemming from Hannah's unforgivable actions, revealed the depth of her disappointment. While I was initially taken aback, I quickly understood her perspective. The idea of severing ties with one's own child was unfathomable to me, which only deepened my gratitude for my mom's unwavering support. Just as we were starting to settle into our new normal, an unexpected visit threw me off balance. With my mom at work and no one scheduled to stop by, I was taken aback by the sight of two men in black suits standing at my door. When they introduced themselves as lawyers, a mix of curiosity and anxiety washed over me, leaving me to wonder what news they brought. I was utterly speechless when they handed me a check for an astonishing $520,000, convinced there had to be some kind of mistake. However, the lawyers assured me there was no error and urged me to read the accompanying note. As I opened it, the message began with a heartfelt thank you for saving me. My confusion deepened as I continued reading, only to realize that this unexpected windfall came from Alexis, my mother-in-law. Alexis's letter unfolded a story of unexpected visits and forwarded attempts to enter due to changed locks, ultimately leading to some shocking revelations. She had sensed that something was off with Daniel's behavior, prompting him to confess his actions. In her letter, she expressed disappointment in her son while extending compassion towards me and her grandchildren. She shared her decision to redirect her entire inheritance to us, a gesture of gratitude and an effort to make amends for the wrongs her son had caused. The lawyers then delivered the devastating news. Alexis was terminally ill and had passed away just a day earlier. Her final wishes were clear. She wanted to ensure that I and her grandchildren were well cared for through the inheritance. The weight of her death and her final act of kindness brought tears to my eyes. Alexis had always been a pillar of integrity and support in my life. Despite Daniel's fear of her, I had always found comfort in her presence. Her last gesture highlighted her unwavering commitment to doing what was right, ensuring that her support would continue to resonate even after she was gone. Alexis's legacy extended far beyond her material possessions. It resided in the love and protection she had shown us, marking the conclusion of a significant chapter in our lives. When Daniel called, I had an inkling of where our conversation was headed, yet I decided to engage out of a sense of morbid curiosity. "What did you do?" he demanded, his tone sharp. His vague wording prompted me to ask for clarification, leading him to express frustration over my absence on a particular day, a day he claimed he had mentioned in a letter instructing me to keep up a facade of normalcy for his mother's visit. "Oh, was that what the letter was about?" I replied, revealing that I had burned it without reading it. Daniel's outrage was immediate and intense. He accused me of sabotaging his potential inheritance, labeling me as selfish. The irony of his accusation wasn't lost on me, considering he had abandoned his family for his own benefit. I countered his claims by emphasizing his abandonment and pointed out that his mother's decision was a reflection of her true understanding of what was best for her grandchildren and me. With that, I ended the call, firmly instructing him never to contact us again. I quickly moved forward with the divorce proceedings and secured full custody of our children. Daniel's attempts to contest Alexis's decision regarding her inheritance were in vain. Her will clearly favored me, regardless of his and Hannah's manipulative efforts to persuade me to give it up. I stood firm in my refusal. The financial security from Alexis's generosity significantly changed our lives. I set aside a substantial amount for my children's future education and made wise investments. This newfound wealth allowed my mom to retire comfortably, and it opened the door for me to pursue a new career path. My children have gradually started to adjust to their father's absence, and I am ready to share the complete story with them when they're old enough to understand. While the ordeal has left its scars, the support from my loved ones and our newfound financial stability have been essential in navigating the aftermath. As we begin to rebuild our lives, I firmly believe that the only way to move is forward, with hope and resilience lighting our path. Hello, my name is Kelly. Ever since I was a child, I dreamed of becoming a journalist or working in magazine publishing. My passion for writing and staying on top of trends naturally led me to pursue a degree in journalism and media. During college, I immersed myself in the world of storytelling, and upon graduation, I started working for several companies. While none were particularly well known, I took pride in knowing I was living out my dream. Around the time I turned 30, I met Matthew, my future husband. Matthew came from a wealthy family that ran a successful business. And while this seemed like a minor detail at first, it turned out to be a significant factor in my life. His mother, Grace, never approved of me. She made it clear from the beginning that she didn't consider me a suitable match for her son, often criticizing my career in journalism and belittling my academic background. Grace's negative attitude was hurtful at first. It's difficult to feel constantly undermined, especially by someone who should welcome you into the family. For reasons only she could understand, Grace thought it was acceptable to treat me poorly. Thankfully, Matthew always stood by me, defending me against her harsh words. His father, Larry, was also on my side, stating up for me whenever Grace crossed the line. Over time, I grew more resilient to her jabs. Matthew even suggested we distance ourselves from her, but I disagreed. Matthew worked closely with his father in the family business, and distancing ourselves from Grace could have made things uncomfortable for Larry, who was nothing but kind. I didn't want to be the cause of tension in their family, nor did I want Matthew to sever ties with his mother. I learned to be patient, recognizing that maintaining family relationships often involves navigating complex emotions and difficult circumstances. We limited our interactions with Grace to a few times a month, but that dynamic shifted when Larry had to travel overseas for business. Grace, not wanting to be alone, moved in with us until his return. I was hesitant about the arrangement but believed that family should come first. Living with Grace, however, was far more challenging than I anticipated. She found fault in almost everything I did, and her criticisms seemed relentless. Still, I managed to maintain my composure, reminding myself that as long as her words caused no actual harm, I could endure her presence. But my patience was truly tested during a particularly stressful week at work. I was leading a major redesign for a section of our magazine, an important project that could lead to a promotion. The pressure was immense, and Grace, oblivious to the weight of my responsibilities, seemed indifferent to the stress I was under. The night before my big presentation, I was discussing my anxieties with Matthew when Grace overheard us. She waltzed into the living room and decided to offer her unsolicited opinion. "Well, Kelly," she began, "I overheard your conversation, and honestly, you probably don't have the skills for this. You'll likely do poorly tomorrow." Her words were cold, and she followed up with, "Maybe it's time to quit and focus on being a housewife." Her comment stung deeply, not just because of the lack of support but because it revealed her complete disregard for my professional aspirations. I tried to brush it off, but then she added, "I can't believe he married a journalist." Her tone was dripping with scorn, as if my career and everything I worked for were worthless in her eyes. Frustrated, I finally stood up for myself. "Grace, you're overstepping. I don't have time for this right now. I have more important things to focus on than your opinion of me." She looked stunned by my boldness. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she shot back, turning to Matthew. "Say something. Your wife is disrespecting your mother." But Matthew stayed calm, siding with me. "Mom, she's just defending herself. There's nothing wrong with that." Grace, clearly offended, accused me of turning Matthew against his family. "Look how easily you've turned him against us," she spat. "You'll regret this, Kelly." Her intrusion into our private conversation and her blatant disrespect left me simmering with anger, but I chose not to let it consume me. Matthew tried to apologize on her behalf, but I stopped him. It wasn't his burden to bear. After that heated exchange, we decided to call it a night. My mind was too occupied with my presentation to dwell on Grace's threats, but the tension lingered. The next morning, I focused on what truly mattered: my career and the opportunity ahead. I arrived at work early, eager and prepared for my presentation. But when I opened my laptop, I was met with a heart-stopping discovery. All the files on my desktop were gone. It was as if my laptop had been completely reset. Panic surged through me as I frantically checked my email, hoping the backups I'd sent would save me. But to my horror, even my inbox and trash had been wiped clean. Overwhelmed and fighting back tears, I approached my boss to explain the situation. His reaction was anything but understanding. He reprimanded me harshly, his voice sharp with frustration, and then coldly told me to forget the presentation altogether. The weight of his words hit me hard. As if that wasn't enough, I soon found out that my boss had a backup presenter lined up, just in case I failed. In that moment, it became painfully clear that my chances for advancement at the company were slim. Devastated by the turn of events, I left the office in tears, my heart heavy with disappointment. When I got home, Matthew was still there. The moment he saw me, his expression changed, and without hesitation, he decided to take the day off to be with me. He pulled me into his arms as I cried, the stress and heartbreak of the morning overwhelming me. Once I had calmed down a little, he gently asked, "What happened, honey? Didn't the presentation go well?" "There was no presentation," I replied, my voice shaky. "At least not by me." Matthew looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? You've been working so hard on this for days. You barely slept." I took a deep breath, still struggling with the shock of it all. When I got to work and opened my laptop, everything was gone. All the files were deleted. His brows furrowed in disbelief. "How is that even possible?" It's embarrassing, I admitted, the memory still fresh and stinging. I had to explain the whole thing to my boss. I'd backed everything up by emailing it to myself, but even my inbox and trash had been completely emptied. Matthew's face softened with sympathy. I'm so sorry this happened. What did your boss say? I sighed, the words still heavy on my chest. He was furious. He called me unprofessional and lazy. And the worst part, he had someone else ready to give the presentation. The bitterness in my voice was hard to hide. But you still have your job, right? Matthew tried to find a silver lining. Yes, but I'm stuck. There's no room for me to advance or move up. I'm done here, I said, defeated. Don't worry, honey. You'll find a better job. I'll be here for you through it all. Just keep working there until you're ready to leave, he reassured me, his support unwavering. Yeah, I'll give my notice soon. I can't believe I worked so hard for this, and just when I was so close, it all slipped away, I said, the realization sinking in. The whole incident had left me shaken. I'd always taken pride in my work, and to have a project unravel so disastrously felt traumatic. Though I stayed on for another week, my heart wasn't in it anymore. When I finally submitted my resignation, I was counting down the days until I could walk away. Throughout this ordeal, Grace's reaction was strangely gleeful. She caught me in tears one day and instead of offering comfort, made snide remarks, gloating over my misfortune. At first, her words fueled my anger, but then I realized that her satisfaction in my struggles was just a reflection of her own bitterness. As I reflected on Grace's behavior, an unsettling thought crossed my mind. What if her delight wasn't just about me leaving my job? What if she had actually been involved in the disaster? The suspicion gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace might have sabotaged my laptop. The idea that she could have played a role in the ruin of my career haunted me. Before bringing such a serious accusation to Matthew, I knew I needed concrete proof. Determined to uncover the truth, I devised a plan to monitor her discreetly. I purchased a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector and installed it in my home office. I sensed the device with my phone, setting everything up to capture any suspicious activity. The next part of my plan was to bait Grace into revealing her possible involvement. I made it a point to appear visibly stressed and anxious whenever I was in the office, hoping it would draw her attention. Matthew was still at work, completely unaware of the unfolding drama. As expected, Grace took notice of my anxious pacing. What's wrong? Are you stressed about another project? She prodded, her tone dripping with false concern. Taking a deep breath, I decided to play into her curiosity. Yeah, it's just been really tough lately, I confided, setting the trap. I've been given another chance to present my work. It could lead to a raise, I shared, trying to mask my anxiety with a glimmer of hope. Grace's interest was immediately piqued, her tone dripping with both surprise and skepticism. Oh, really? Yes, I continued, but I'm nervous. This is my last chance to get it right, and I have to do well. I watched her reaction carefully, hoping to catch a hint of her true intentions. Why aren't you telling Matthew? Are you embarrassed about your job? She asked, her words sharp. It's not that, I sighed. I just don't want to disappoint him again. Please, let's keep this between us, okay? I pleaded, trying to gauge her response. Grace shrugged, her reply chilling. I'm not promising anything, but it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Frustrated, I couldn't hold back. Why do you always want me to fail? I confronted her. Grace scoffed. I just think you'd be better off as a housewife. It's less embarrassing than what you're doing now. Her words stung, and I felt my patience thin. I don't have time for this, and I don't care what you think. Please just leave me alone so I can practice before Matthew gets home. With that, Grace finally left, but her unsettling smirk lingered in my mind long after she was gone. I stayed in the office a little while longer, processing everything before leaving to join Matthew when he got home. Throughout dinner, I couldn't shake the unease that her occasional smirks brought. Each one sent a ripple of anxiety through me, heightening my suspicion. Later that night, after Matthew and I had settled into our usual routine of watching a few episodes of our favorite show, I decided it was time to check the footage from the hidden camera in my office. As we watched, the screen showed nothing unusual until around midnight. That's when Grace stealthily entered the office. My heart raced as I hastily showed Matthew the live feed on my phone. At first, he was puzzled, but soon disbelief crossed his face as Grace tampered with my laptop, causing it to shut off and restart. Matthew's expression shifted from shock to anger as he realized what was happening. Meanwhile, the camera showed Grace rifling through my files. Unable to contain his frustration, Matthew stormed into the office, his footsteps heavy with fury. He burst through the door, startling Grace, who spun around, caught in the act. "What are you doing in here, Ma?" Matthew demanded, his voice strained as he tried to maintain his composure. "Oh, nothing really," Grace replied, feigning nonchalance. "Then why is Kelly's laptop open? Are you accusing me of going through her stuff?" Matthew pressed, his voice rising with suspicion. "I think you did more than just go through her laptop, Mom. Did you come here to tidy up at midnight? You know Kelly would never leave her laptop open like that," Matthew retorted, his frustration clear. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm still your mother," Grace snapped defensively. "Yeah, my mother who seems to enjoy hurting and sabotaging my wife," Matthew shot back, his voice unwavering. "We caught you on camera resetting Kelly's laptop. You were spying on me? That's disgusting. How could you film me without my consent?" Grace exclaimed, her indignation rising. "I didn't put cameras in your room," I interjected, stepping beside Matthew. "I installed one in my office. You went in there without permission." The confrontation had brought to light the extent of Grace's interference, and it was a defining moment for all of us, a test of both loyalty and trust. Despite her wrongdoing, Matthew stood firm in his decision. "Even if we did film you, it's nothing compared to what you've done to Kelly. I want you out of our house tomorrow," he declared resolutely. Grace's voice wavered with desperation. "But I'll be all alone." "I don't care, Mom. I don't want to talk to you right now," Matthew replied, his mind made up. The next morning, Grace attempted to stall her departure by making breakfast and washing dishes, hoping to buy more time. But Matthew wasn't swayed. As soon as she finished, he came downstairs with her bags already packed. "Your Uber's on its way," he informed her. Grace pleaded tearfully, a rare display of vulnerability from someone who typically brought others to tears. But Matthew, unmoved, retreated to our room, leaving me to face her alone. "You set me up," Grace lashed out, her voice trembling with accusation. I met her gaze calmly, though my words were firm. "If anyone should be yelling, it's me. You're lucky I haven't shared the footage with your friends and family. If they knew what you did, you'd lose them all." My words silenced her. After Grace's departure, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though my job situation still weighed heavily on my mind. However, with Matthew's support, I knew I'd find my way forward. Once my notice period ended, I took some time off to rest and recalibrate. In the months that followed, I enrolled in specialized courses related to my field, honing in on a niche that could give me the edge I needed. My decision not to expose Grace was driven by a desire to rise above her pettiness and prove my capabilities on my own terms. With Matthew's family connections, I secured several promising recommendations, and with his unwavering support, I found the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. I was offered the role of chief editor at a globally recognized magazine. The work was demanding but incredibly fulfilling. As I threw myself into my new role, the need to prove myself to Grace faded into the background. In fact, during those transformative months, we had no contact with her at all. My journey to becoming chief editor wasn't just a professional victory, it was a personal liberation. I no longer needed to validate my worth to someone who had doubted me. Matthew, meanwhile, continued to maintain a professional relationship with his father, Larry, though we heard little about Grace. Larry hinted that she still harbored some resentment, but he kept the details to himself. Despite knowing that Grace hadn't completely let go of her bitterness, I was content. I had risen above her schemes, and I felt stronger for it. Yet deep down, I knew a confrontation with her was inevitable, especially given the unresolved tension that lingered in the background. When I found out that both Grace and Larry were attending a significant company event I'd be at, I braced myself. The party was a grand affair with prominent figures from various industries in attendance. Matthew and I made sure to look our best, fully aware of our own growing influence. As we arrived, we spotted Larry and Grace waving us over. We approached them, exchanging pleasantries, though Grace's eyes raked over me with a critical smirk. "Look at you, trying to fit in," she sneered. Ignoring her, Larry chimed in warmly, "Kelly, you look lovely as always." "Thanks, Larry. How have you been?" I asked, steering the conversation away from Grace's pettiness. "Yeah, how's unemployment treating you?" Grace cut in sharply. "Wait, you're unemployed?" Larry asked, genuinely surprised. "Oh, yes, she messed up at her job, and they let her go. I've always said she's not good enough for our son. Look at her, she can't even keep a job. Grace mocked, her grin malicious. That's enough, Mom, Matthew intervened, his tone firm. Stop siding with her. It's bad enough having to see her everywhere. We wouldn't have to if you just left her, like I said, Grace insisted stubbornly. All right, that's enough. Either you stop talking or I'm leaving, Matthew warned, his patience wearing thin. Larry, trying to ease the tension, smiled at me. Kelly, sweetie, if you need a job, let me know. It would be great to work with you. That's kind of you, Larry, but I'll have to pass, I replied graciously, though I appreciated his offer. Grace muttered under her breath, Of course not. I told you she's lazy and incompetent. Just then, my name echoed through the room, followed by a wave of cheers. I turned to see the CEO motioning for me to come up to the small stage. Excusing myself, I left Grace and Larry behind, with Larry amused and Grace for once speechless. As I stepped onto the stage, the CEO began praising my contributions to the company, particularly my innovative ideas for the magazine. The room filled with applause, and I was soon invited to give a speech. Standing there, I thanked Matthew for his unwavering support and acknowledged the efforts of my colleagues, whose collaboration had been invaluable. I also subtly alluded to an unnamed critic whose skepticism had fueled my determination to excel. When I stepped off the stage, I was met with congratulations from various guests, many of whom were curious about the mysterious critic. I smiled but kept that detail to myself. Returning to our table, Matthew greeted me with a proud embrace, and Larry offered his congratulations with a warm hug. Grace, however, could only manage a cold, disdainful glare. Oh, Kelly, this is incredible. Now I see why you wouldn't want to work with us, Larry remarked, genuine admiration in his voice. Thanks, Larry. Honestly, if you'd offered me a job 8 months ago, I might have taken it, I admitted, reflecting on how far I had come. You should have. At least then you'd be paid more, Grace interjected sharply, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Paid more? I couldn't put a price on this, Larry countered, defending the intangible rewards of my current position. Right, like she's worth that kind of money, Grace scoffed dismissively. No, Grace, I mean I couldn't match what she's making right now, Larry clarified, hinting at my substantial earnings. Grace's face twisted in confusion. What do you mean? Larry turned to me, asking for permission. Do you want me to tell her, Kelly? It might sound like boasting if I do. With a nod, I allowed him to reveal the truth. Kelly makes at least 6 times more than I do in her current role, Larry said, his words leaving Grace visibly stunned. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She must be making way more than Matthew or I could have imagined, Grace muttered, her tone shifting from disbelief to reluctant acknowledgement. That can't be right. You must be mistaken, she insisted, still struggling to grasp the reality. He's not mistaken, Mom, Matthew interjected calmly. And I meant it when I thanked you. Your constant criticism only pushed me to support Kelly even more. Seeing her success probably stings, doesn't it? Grace's eyes narrowed, her anger barely concealed. I smiled politely. Anyway, Matthew and I have other people to speak with. Grace, Larry, feel free to join us later, I said, making it clear we were moving on. Larry chuckled, raising his glass in a small toast to me as Matthew and I walked away. I felt more alive than ever, validated, triumphant, and grateful for Matthew's unwavering support through it all. An ambulance? No, we can't call one, my husband shouted, panic evident in his voice. After years apart, we have finally reunited with Naomi, and in her arms was a small child. As I looked closer, it became clear that Naomi was noticeably pregnant. The unexpected situation left my mind blank for a moment, but I quickly realized they needed help. That's when Naomi made a special request. My name is Mary, and I'm 60 years old. I now assist my husband, Isaac, who works as a potter. After graduating from college, I worked as a general office clerk. However, I met Isaac through a pottery event. The event displayed and sold pottery, and there was also an area where you could try your hand at pottery making. Though I had little interest in pottery at the time, a poster at the city hall caught my eye, so I decided to visit. As I wandered around, I found the pottery experience area and learned pottery from Isaac. The experience sparked a deep fascination with pottery in me, and I began visiting his home and workshop to see more of his work. Isaac remembered me, and each time we met, we had engaging conversations. Eventually, our relationship transformed from craftsman and customer to lovers, and after 3 years of dating, we married. Isaac always encouraged me to pursue what I loved, but I was so captivated by pottery that I decided to support his work. By the time we married, his parents had already retired from pottery, which made me even more determined to stand by his side. Amidst all this, we were blessed with a daughter, whom we named Naomi. We showered her with love and affection. When Naomi was 3, Isaac and I wanted her to appreciate the charm of pottery, so we took her to the workshop and let her touch and shape the clay. Naomi showed a natural talent, creating beautiful pieces and taking great joy in her work. As she grew, she expressed a desire to continue the family business, brightening our future even more. Isaac had several apprentices who were all kind and welcoming to the idea of Naomi working there in the future. After graduating high school, Naomi went on to university, where she studied not only pottery but also Japanese history and cultural arts. On holidays and days off from class, she helped with the family business, honing her skills. Thanks to Isaac's guidance from a young age, her talents developed impressively, astonishing everyone around her. However, Naomi never became arrogant. Instead, she continued her efforts to spread the charm of pottery throughout Japan, working closely with her disciples. 5 years passed since Naomi graduated from university, and as she approached 30, we often marveled at how quickly she had grown. Then one day, Naomi shared some surprising news. "Mom, I'm getting married." Married? I exclaimed in shock at her sudden announcement. Naomi had a boyfriend since her university days, and while I had anticipated that they might eventually marry, hearing the news still left me speechless. His name was Sean. I had spoken with him several times and felt he was a very good person. Later, Naomi explained the circumstances leading up to their marriage. It seems he had first proposed right after she graduated, but at the time she wanted to focus on continuing the family's pottery business and asked him to wait a little longer. Sean respected her wishes and continued to propose over the years. Time passed, and one day when Naomi felt ready to make a decision, she opened her social media and saw photos of her classmates with their children. Seeing their happiness, she realized it might be time for her to marry too. Everyone's married with children, and I'm still not, she thought to herself. After reflecting on it, she decided, I want to marry Sean. If that's your choice, we have nothing against it, I told her. Thank you, she replied. Naomi had set a few conditions before accepting Sean's proposal. She wanted to continue working as before and wasn't considering having children for a while. While her classmates with children seemed happy, she wished to maintain her current lifestyle even after marrying. Sean agreed, and they decided to move forward with the marriage. However, I knew that inevitable changes in lifestyle might arise, and Naomi could find some of these unknown changes confusing. I heard that their new home would be near ours, and I wanted to offer as much support as possible. Feel free to ask us about anything, I told her. Yes, thank you so much, Naomi replied. The reality of my daughter getting married was still sinking in, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves when Naomi talked about it. But after hearing her thoughts, I was relieved to know she had made a well-considered decision. I had been hoping Naomi would build a happy family, but this marriage would soon reveal Sean's true character, drastically altering her once joyful life. After leaving home, Naomi started a new life with Sean, and even after their marriage, she frequently returned to her parents' home, allowing us to maintain the close relationship we always had. However, about 6 months into the marriage, we were suddenly informed that they would be moving far away due to a transfer from Sean's company. Sean had known about the potential transfer before marrying Naomi, but had kept it a secret, likely fearing she would leave him if she knew. This revelation made me doubt Sean and wonder if he genuinely considered Naomi's feelings. I asked her, "Are you sure this is okay? Isn't it possible for him to go alone?" Naomi replied that she had suggested staying behind to continue her job, but Sean insisted that he needed her with him. She decided to comply with his request, remembering how he had cared for her in the past. I chose to remain silent, and soon after, Naomi and Sean moved away, leaving me deeply saddened. The students and I, who had spent so much time together with her, felt her absence acutely, which only reaffirmed her importance to us. Half a year later, on what seemed like an ordinary day, I received an astonishing call from Naomi. She had given birth to a child. This was my first grandchild, and while I was overjoyed, questions began to arise. Considering the timing of their move, she must have been pregnant when they left. She had previously mentioned not wanting children for a while, so what changed her mind? And why decide to have a child knowing they were moving? These thoughts began to spread through my mind. When I asked about Naomi's well-being, she assured me everything was fine. If she said it was all right, I felt it wasn't my place to worry further. I ended the call by reminding her that she could always return home if needed. After discussing the situation with Isaac, we concluded that since Sean seemed to be harboring doubts, but Naomi insisted everything was fine, it was better not to pry too deeply. We decided to stay in touch, ready to act immediately if anything happened. However, since the birth of our grandchild, we had received no news and our worry began to grow. When I couldn't bear it any longer, I tried to contact her, but it was Sean, not Naomi, who answered the phone. "Sean, where's Naomi?" "She's in the bath right now." "I see, I understand," I replied, though I felt uneasy. After Naomi became a full-time housewife and started her new life, I tried calling her cell phone during the day but got no response. When I called again at night, it was Sean who answered, saying Naomi was in the bath, and I couldn't speak to her. I couldn't understand why Sean was always the one answering when I was clearly calling Naomi's number. "Why is it always you answering? I call during the day, and nobody picks up." "She's in the bath, I told you," he replied, "even in the daytime, I don't know." I was shocked and lost for words at Sean's defiant response. Sensing my silence, he quickly ended the call. Since then, each time I tried to reach her, Sean would come up with reasons like, "The baby is crying, so please stop calling," or, "Isn't this getting a bit excessive?" My suspicion toward Sean only grew, but I was completely taken aback when I finally heard the reason behind his attitude. "The truth is, Naomi doesn't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Could you please stop calling?" he said. "What? Why would she say that? Are you sure this is really what Naomi wants? Your parenting was too strict. She's actually been wanting to leave for a while. She had her apprentices and couldn't easily break away, but now she's out and truly happy. That can't be. Do you think we're deceiving you? Don't you find it strange that your calls don't connect during the day? Naomi is avoiding contact with you. It's about time you understand that." I was utterly shocked. I was at a loss for words, stunned into silence as Sean continued, "Can't you tell by my attitude? Let me be clear, we're bothered by you. I wondered when you'd realize it, but you're incredibly oblivious. If you had noticed from the start, you'd have seen that Naomi never suffered as much as you think. You're too slow to notice anything. That's your answer, so please don't contact us again," he said, and then hung up the phone. "Wait, just a moment," I called out, but my words didn't reach him. After the call ended, I was left with nothing but a sense of emptiness. I tried calling again the next day at noon, but it seemed Sean had blocked my calls, likely to shield Naomi. Reflecting on Sean's past behavior and statements, I began to understand. Was Naomi truly afraid of us? The thought alone made sadness well up within me. When my husband Isaac returned home, I explained the situation about Sean and Naomi. He looked just as sad and lost for words as I was. "So we should probably not get involved anymore, right?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, the reality sinking in. I never imagined Naomi was going through such hard times. We fully believed Sean's story and decided not to contact Naomi anymore. 4 years passed and our family business thrived. Our works found buyers one after another, our income and fame grew, and not just us, but our apprentices also celebrated the success. As time passed, some apprentices left to become independent, others joined, and we even found a successor to continue the family business, bringing us some peace of mind. However, we never forgot about Naomi. We were constantly worried about her well-being and safety, but we restrained ourselves, not wanting to scare her further, and avoided contact. Then, on an unbelievable day, an intense typhoon struck. As the wind and rain intensified, we took a break from work and stayed home. It had been a while since we could spend time together as a couple during a storm. Late into the night, while we were asleep, the doorbell suddenly rang, waking us up. It must have been around 1:00 a.m. Who could it be at this time of night? Isaac wondered, turning on the light and looking at me. "I don't know," I replied, feeling a mix of anxiety and curiosity. We hesitantly moved toward the entrance. Isaac, gathering his courage, opened the door, and there stood an unexpected figure. "Dad, Mom." Naomi's voice trembled as she spoke. To our disbelief, it was Naomi standing there with a child in her arms, a girl who had lost consciousness, undoubtedly our granddaughter. "She's still alive, but she's in critical condition," Naomi said, her voice strained. As we took a closer look at Naomi, we noticed she was visibly pregnant. "Are you pregnant again?" I asked, my heart racing. 9 months, she replied, her voice barely a whisper while I struggled to keep my panic in check. I quickly realized that both the baby and Naomi were in immediate danger. Before diving into the details, I knew the most important thing was to get them to the hospital as soon as possible. Naomi, desperate and scared, pleaded, "Please call an ambulance." However, Isaac, caught off guard by the intensity of the situation, refused her request. "What are you talking about? There's no way I can call one in this storm," he exclaimed, his frustration slipping out. But then, seeing the fear in Naomi's eyes, he softened. "It's okay, I'll take you to the emergency room tonight." Unfortunately, Isaac had already been drinking and couldn't drive, so I stepped in. I quickly prepared the car and drove Naomi and her child to the hospital myself. Thankfully, we arrived swiftly, and she was able to receive the urgent medical attention she needed. The diagnosis was severe malnutrition for both Naomi and her child. They were immediately hospitalized and began receiving treatment. Thankfully, there was no major impact on the baby, and we felt a momentary relief, knowing they were in good hands. We decided to wait until Naomi had recovered before asking her for the full story. As we arrived at the hospital, Naomi lost consciousness during the examination. While waiting for Isaac to bring clothes for Naomi and her child, I stayed by her side, watching over her as she lay unconscious. The nurses assured me they would take care of her grandchild, which lightened my heart a bit. Looking at Naomi, I noticed the deep fatigue etched into her face. The dark shadows under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and relentless stress. I had no idea what had happened to her after they moved, but it was clear that she had been through an overwhelming amount of hardship. I quietly watched over Naomi as she slept. Just after 11 a.m., she finally opened her eyes. "Mom," she murmured. "Naomi?" I responded softly, relieved to see her awake. She looked slightly better than yesterday, perhaps due to the rest, but I still couldn't shake the worry. I called the nurse to inform them that Naomi had woken up, and after the doctor examined her, she returned to her room. I approached her quietly, unsure of how to begin. "Naomi, are you okay?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She offered a calm smile and replied, "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you, Mom." "I'm relieved to hear that, but you really gave us a scare." "I'm sorry, Mom. I must have troubled Dad too. He must have been shocked." "We were shocked, but that doesn't matter. We're just worried about you." Naomi didn't seem afraid of us. Instead, she looked relieved. As she lay in bed, we continued our conversation. To us, she was still our beloved daughter, even though she had become Sean's wife. As parents, we couldn't stop worrying about why she had arrived in such an exhausted state and why she had come in the middle of the night. But we hesitated to pry too deeply, so I decided to wait until Naomi was ready to talk on her own. It was okay if she didn't say anything. Her feelings were our priority. As days passed, Naomi visibly regained her energy and began to smile more often. The tension of our reunion after so many years transformed into a sense of relief as she started to open up to us. One day, while visiting Naomi's hospital room with Isaac, we noticed she had a serious, contemplative look on her face. Curious about what was on her mind, we decided to act as usual, though her smile suggested something was different. Eventually, Naomi spoke up, her voice earnest. "Can I talk about what happened after I moved?" We were surprised by her sudden words, but it seemed Naomi had resolved to share her story. "Of course. If you want to talk, we're here to listen," I assured her. "Thanks. Then I'll begin." As Naomi started her story, we were astounded by what she revealed. Apparently, Sean was not the person she had thought he was. She had accepted his proposal, believing it would lead to happiness. After years of being in a relationship, she thought she knew him well. But after marrying him, she discovered his true nature. Sean was incredibly possessive, demanding her full attention at all times. He isolated her from her friends, prohibited her from doing anything outside of household chores, and forbade her from leaving the house. He even confiscated her smartphone, cutting off all her means of communication with the outside world. The last time Naomi had informed me about the birth of our grandchild was just before he seized her phone. "Why didn't you seek help earlier?" I asked, shocked. Naomi explained that she thought it would be futile. Sean had convinced her that we despised her and that he was the only one she could rely on. Admitting this left Naomi visibly shaken, and I felt a surge of sadness and anger on her behalf. Naomi had developed a deep fear of us, exacerbated by the severe restrictions imposed on her life. She wasn't allowed proper sleep and was given only a single piece of bread for her daily meal. Even the times she could use the bathroom were strictly controlled, and she wasn't permitted to leave her room outside those times. The extremity of her situation became evident from her harrowing account. Overwhelmed with guilt for raising her child in such dire conditions, Naomi resolved to flee. After seeing her child sleep lifelessly, she was driven by the desperate need to provide a better life. Despite believing her family might dislike her, she decided to return to her hometown for help. Acting swiftly, she sneaked out of the house and caught the last train to reach us. Hearing her confession made everything fall into place. To ensure she wasn't just afraid of us, we asked, and she shook her head in response. "He was lying to you too," she said. I replied, "It's easy to believe what you're told. I'm sorry I didn't notice anything sooner." We then contacted the police and filed a report. A female officer came to the hospital to gather details, and the police immediately raided Sean's house. However, he had already fled, likely in search of Naomi. The police increased patrols around the hospital and our home, anticipating his return. Weeks later, Naomi gave birth while still hospitalized and was discharged with her child. We breathed a sigh of relief at the arrival of the new life. With the family business left in the capable hands of apprentices and Isaac back at home, we felt more secure. Although the situation remained precarious, seeing Naomi smile like she used to filled us with happiness. We deeply hoped for these peaceful days to continue, but reality often defies our expectations. One seemingly peaceful afternoon, while preparing lunch, a sudden noise came from the second floor where no one was supposed to be. Isaac, who had been relaxed, noticed the sound and said, "I'll go check upstairs." We would have ignored such a noise before, but ever since Naomi's incident, we had been living on high alert. I told Naomi and her children to stay close and watch for any signs of trouble, clutching my smartphone. Then a shout echoed from the second floor, "What are you doing?" It was clear there was a scuffle with an intruder. "It seems my dear husband has changed somehow," he told me. "I'm giving this house to Olivia. If you don't agree, we might need to consider divorce." I was stunned. Why would he give away the house that I bought and lovingly maintained in my name to our eldest son's wife, Olivia? "Maybe you should start looking for a new place soon," he said. It was clear he had a lot of trust in Olivia. With the house in my name and the $1,200 mortgage, I could manage. My eldest son seemed to think the same way. "Honestly, I'm not that attached to this old house." "All right, I'll move out," I said, "but be prepared for the challenges you three might face in the future." I'm Kate, 50 years old, with a solid position at a major company. I live a relaxed life with my husband Paul, who is 2 years younger than me. Last year, we decided to renovate our slightly outdated house, which my father had built. We hoped the renovations would set us up nicely for retirement. The mortgage is $3,000 a month, which I can handle comfortably with my salary. Paul, who manages a small restaurant, earns less, so it seemed practical to put the mortgage in my name. He once mentioned that covering the mortgage payments with just my income might be tough, but we managed. "This house was originally your father's and is now in your name," Paul had said. "Can you handle the full payments? I'll cover our living expenses." After the renovations, the house looked fantastic, and we were thrilled about our refreshed home and the future ahead. But then, things took an unexpected turn. One day, my phone buzzed with a surprising message from our eldest son, David. "I'm thinking of getting married," he said. At 31, David had always been dedicated to his work and had never mentioned a girlfriend before. I wondered about her and what kind of person she might be. If David liked her, she must be wonderful, but I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and concern. When we finally met Olivia, she had long hair and a lovely personality. She greeted us warmly. "Hello, I'm Olivia," she said, her smile radiating like summer sunshine. I thought to myself, she's too wonderful to be with David. Paul was equally impressed. "She's incredible, really charming," Paul murmured. Olivia, sensing his praise, hugged him and said, "I'm so glad you said that. I hope we can get even closer from now on." Her behavior surprised me, and even David seemed taken aback. Paul looked slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I was too forward," Olivia said with a smile, stepping back. "I sometimes get close to people without realizing it. My friends always point it out, and though I try to be mindful, she laughed apologetically. Her initial behavior was surprising, but seeing the way David's eyes lit up when he spoke of her made it clear how much he loved her. Olivia isn't great with personal space, but that's part of her charm, David explained. She naturally brings people close, making even someone as shy as me enjoy the conversation. Despite the initial shock, I felt she would be a warm and loving daughter-in-law. Time passed, and Olivia and David prepared for marriage, eventually registering their union. It warmed my heart to think about their future together. Then, shortly after their wedding, I came home to find unfamiliar women's shoes at the entrance. Inside, I saw Paul and Olivia together. Olivia greeted me with a smile. "Welcome home, Kate." The living room was cluttered with empty cans and bottles. "What's going on here?" I asked, taken aback. Olivia explained, "We bumped into each other on the way home and decided to have a drink together to strengthen our bond. With the finances tight this month, we thought it would be better to drink here rather than go out." I was surprised to see them drinking alone at home. I didn't want to intrude on their newlywed time, but I wondered why they hadn't just gone to David's place. Olivia, slightly tipsy, mentioned, "Our room's a bit messy, but this place is so clean and comfortable." Where was David? It seemed unusual for a new bride to be drinking alone at our house. I looked around, half expecting David to be hiding somewhere. "Dave's been working late nights and feeling a bit lonely," Olivia explained, sensing my concern. I came downstairs to find Olivia with tears streaming down her face. Paul, his voice gentle, said, "It's okay, Olivia. Talk to me if things get tough," as he patted her head reassuringly. "Thank you, Paul," Olivia responded, her voice trembling. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I couldn't shake the odd, uncomfortable feeling that seemed to ripple through the room. "Paul, Olivia is important to David. Maybe you should consider keeping a bit more distance," I suggested softly. Olivia, however, defended Paul with a smile. "He's just worried about me," she said. I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. This was more than I expected, and I felt a wave of exhaustion from work wash over me. "I can't deal with this right now. I'm going to take a bath." "Please clean up," I said, longing for the solace of a warm bath. After soaking in the tub, surrounded by bubbles and the soothing scent of bath oil, I felt my mind drift far away. Once I emerged and dressed, I was surprised to find David, who was supposed to be driving home, already at the house, looking slightly tipsy. "David, weren't you supposed to drive home?" I asked, bewildered. He grinned, a bit unsteady. "Olivia suggested we have a drink together, and I got pulled in. I've decided to stay here tonight." "Hey, Mom, why not have a drink with your son? It's been a while," he said with enthusiasm. I felt uneasy with an unexpected overnight guest and Olivia's presence. I can drive you both home if you'd like," I offered, but David waved it off. "You must be tired too. It's fine, we'll stay here." Amidst the awkwardness, I heard laughter. Glancing at Olivia, I caught a momentary glimpse of her staring at me intently. Her gaze made me uneasy, leaving me to wonder if I had misunderstood the situation. I tried to reassure myself, but little did I know that Olivia's grand plan was already in motion. The next morning, she arrived at my house first thing, repeatedly apologizing for her behavior. Her reaction seemed a bit excessive, but I understood where she was coming from. When I told her it was all right, she left, looking visibly relieved. However, that night, to my surprise, Olivia was back at my house again. David was nowhere to be seen, and Olivia seemed different from before, which made me worry. "I'm sorry for coming again," she said, handing me a box of sweets. Paul also apologized, albeit sheepishly. "I might have been a bit overexcited yesterday. Sorry about that." I figured if this would help them bond, I should forgive them for now. Both Olivia and Paul thanked me sincerely, but just when I thought I couldn't feel more mentally exhausted, a new twist awaited. One day, Paul approached me with a grim expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. I chose the living room as our spot to chat. While waiting, I was stunned to see David and Olivia walk in. My shock was evident as I greeted them with a confused "long time no see," but they only sat silently. The tense atmosphere hinted at some major news, making me increasingly anxious. Paul finally spoke, dropping a bombshell. "From now on, this house will belong to Olivia. If you can't accept that, we might have to reconsider our relationship." "Why are you saying this?" I asked, my voice a mix of shock and confusion. Before I could process what was happening, Olivia shouted, "You need to leave this house." I was utterly dumbfounded. "Hold on, explain yourself." What do you mean, giving the house to Olivia? Paul's cheeks flushed as he replied, You've always caused trouble for Olivia. You should have thought about this before it got too late. I was at a loss for words, struggling to understand the sudden and harsh turn of events. I felt a deep sense of injustice. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet Paul seemed unconvinced. Olivia, tearfully, told them how much I had hurt her, recounting her pain. She stood next to Paul, visibly trying to hold back her tears. David looked at me with a disapproving gaze, saying, I never imagined you'd do something like this, Mom. It's heartbreaking. Despite my attempts to explain, my words fell on deaf ears, and Olivia's tears continued to flow. Paul coldly announced, That's why we decided to go our separate ways. The three of us will live in this house. His words felt remarkably heartless. Why should I have to give my house to Olivia? I asked, my confusion evident. Paul replied, Olivia is deeply hurt. Demanding compensation is one way to address it, but I thought of a different approach. I know how much this house means to you, so by taking it, maybe you'll understand the impact of your behavior. I struggled to believe this was fair or true, as I had never been unkind to Olivia. Moreover, considering Olivia hadn't worked since getting married, a $3,000 monthly mortgage seemed unmanageable for her. When I pointed this out, Paul responded with a smile. The mortgage will be transferred to David's name. Given his salary and position, the transition should be smooth. I asked, Is it really that simple to transfer the mortgage? Paul nodded, explaining, Usually it's difficult, but David works at a reputable company, and I have connections at the bank where you have the mortgage. I'm confident it can be arranged. His assurances did little to ease my concerns. The atmosphere grew increasingly hostile, as if I was being forced to surrender my home. Despite repeating my stance, I couldn't understand why I was being blamed when I had done nothing to Olivia. I couldn't bear the thought of giving up my house. Paul and Olivia grew increasingly frustrated with my response, and the conversation felt unbearably tense. Olivia, who had been crying the whole time, finally spoke softly, Kate, please understand. Think of the baby. She gently stroked her belly. David added, It's true, Mom. Olivia is pregnant, and if she's under too much stress, it could harm the baby. You need to consider that. The revelation that Olivia was pregnant complicated things. No one wants to add stress during pregnancy, but being asked to surrender my home on such short notice was overwhelming. Give me a moment to think, I said, retreating to my room. Lying on my bed, I was lost in thought when I noticed a long strand of hair on the pillow. No one in my family had hair like this. My heart raced with the unsettling thought of an affair. This realization only added to my confusion and distress. I felt as if I were trapped in a nightmare, hoping to wake up and find everything back to normal. Tears streamed down my face as I drifted off to sleep, wishing this turmoil was just a bad dream. Late that night, I was jolted awake by voices coming from the living room, not David and Olivia, but a cheerful Paul and Olivia. Their conversation, filled with laughter and casual banter, felt completely out of place. I heard Olivia say, Oh, I really wanted to drink wine. Paul replied, Remember, you have a baby now. Their carefree chatter weighed heavily on me, and my heart sank further with Olivia's recent behavior. Then an unmistakable sound, a kiss, echoed through the house. Olivia murmured, Oh, Paul, what if David or Kate sees us? It would be so embarrassing. My mind spun in disbelief. What were they doing? My stomach churned as I realized the depth of their betrayal. They were likely planning to enjoy themselves while I was out of the house. The thought was sickening. The long hair was definitely Olivia's, and without saying a word, I lay there listening to their conversation, feeling a wave of nausea. The idea of staying in a house that now felt tainted by their actions was unbearable. I no longer wanted a home that brought me such feelings. The next morning, I resolved that I needed to move on. I emerged in front of the three of them, rubbing my tired eyes. I hadn't slept well in that bed, but I kept that to myself. Have you finally made up your mind? They asked, their faces hopeful. I've decided to give up the house, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Their expressions brightened immediately. Great, let's move quickly with the ownership transfer. If the house is in my name, the mortgage inspection will be fine, David said excitedly. He seemed oblivious to the full extent of the situation. My heart ached for him, but I chose not to reveal the whole truth. He had always followed Olivia's lead, and I wasn't ready to shatter his trust in her. The next few days were a whirlwind of divorce proceedings and transferring home ownership. Finally, the paperwork was completed. and the house was officially under a new name. "There's no place for you here anymore," Paul said with a touch of sarcasm. "Grandma, it's time to leave." Olivia leaned in and whispered something into my ear. It stung a bit, but even without her comment, I was already resolved to leave. The house held countless memories, but given what had happened, I had no reason to stay. I knew my next actions would stir things up for this peculiar trio. The real drama was just beginning. A month passed, a time for me to gather my thoughts, and I found myself standing in front of that house again. I took a deep breath and hesitantly pressed the doorbell of the house I hadn't visited in so long. My heartbeat seemed to echo in the quiet. "Why are you here?" Paul's slightly annoyed voice reached my ears. It felt strange hearing his tone after so long. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "Why should I let you in?" Paul acted as if I were a distant memory. "It involves Olivia," I said, knowing that mentioning her name would soften his stance. I didn't enjoy bringing her up, but I knew it would make an impact. "Oh, look who's here," Paul said sarcastically. His words were legally accurate but still painful. "What do you want?" everyone asked, their eyes filled with suspicion. I took a deep breath and pulled a photo from my pocket. "Can you take a look at this?" I asked, as all eyes turned to the image. The photo showed Paul and Olivia on a date, looking happy and intimate. After the divorce, I had hired a private detective to monitor them discreetly. It wasn't long before I received pictures of their outings. "What's this about?" David's face changed instantly upon seeing the photo. "Where was this taken?" Paul exclaimed, clearly in shock. "What's the big deal?" Olivia interjected defensively. "We're just father-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were just enjoying ourselves." I smirked and pulled out my smartphone. "Listen to this," I said, pressing play on a recording. Paul's voice came through clearly. "Olivia, I really love you," followed by Olivia's voice, hushed and anxious. "If you're too loud, someone will hear in the next room." The recording included sounds that resembled kisses. Paul and Olivia fell silent, their faces registering shock. Seizing the moment, I asked, "Olivia, whose child are you carrying?" David's expression turned to one of confusion and panic. "Could it be my father's?" he murmured. "That's impossible," Olivia began, but her words faltered, catching in her throat. David's anger erupted, leading to a physical altercation with Paul. In the middle of their fight, Olivia cried out in pain, momentarily halting their clash. I seized that opportunity to speak. "Haven't I always said I never bullied Olivia? I feel like she's hiding something from me. Maybe she's lying to David to get me out of the house." David looked utterly shocked by my accusation. "I can't believe it," David said, his voice trembling with regret and disbelief. "I feel so pathetic for doubting Mom. What are you hiding? Tell me everything." His eyes burned with anger. For a moment, Paul and Olivia remained silent, their faces showing shock. David continued, "There's so much evidence. We could even take this to court." The color drained from their faces as the gravity of the situation set in. Olivia began to speak through her tears. "When David and I went on our first date, I really enjoyed it. But the first time I saw this house, I fell in love. My family home is so old, and I dreamed of living in a beautiful house like this. I got close to Paul for that reason. When we were introduced for marriage, I waited for Paul to return, and we had drinks alone. We became close, and it seems we planned to get you out of the house." Olivia's apologies were interspersed with tears. "I'm so sorry. I got too greedy. I should have been honest from the start about wanting to live together." Her voice carried a hint of regret. "In my family, my mom and grandma always argued. I was scared of living with a mother-in-law. This house is so beautiful and comfortable. I was hoping you'd leave." Her admission of the affair with her father-in-law was deeply unsettling. Paul took a deep breath, trying to explain. "Every time I saw her smile, I knew she was using me, but the time we spent together felt so good. Still, it's unforgivable." David's response was brief but carried a heavy weight. His eyes were filled with betrayal, sadness, and anger. Both Paul and Olivia were left speechless, tears streaming down their faces. It was no surprise when David decided to divorce, and a DNA test later confirmed Paul was the father of the baby. "I never thought this day would come," David murmured softly. I gently stroked his head, reflecting on how our family had changed because of Olivia. It seemed she hadn't fully grasped how her choices would impact her future. I had a feeling that, with time, my premonitions would come true. 2 years later, on a sunny day, Olivia remarried Paul and started a new life with him under the same roof. Their children went to a nearby daycare, and Olivia tried to make friends with other mothers, though she often felt isolated. Her family's resistance to her divorce from David and her remarriage to Paul had strained their relationship. Their anger towards Paul remained intense, and family gatherings were rare. Meanwhile, the big, beautiful house now quietly stood, occupied only by David. He found solace in the memories of the past and hopes for the future. "I've thought about selling this house, but my mother grew up here. I can't easily part with such a cherished home," David said, looking into the distance. He had cleaned and sorted out everything Paul and Olivia had left behind. With a hint of embarrassment, he added, "If I had known you'd go through all this trouble, I wouldn't have said anything. I know it's not right to blame them, but I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you can forgive me, but please feel free to visit the house once in a while. I'd like us to share more together." He handed me a voucher for a resort hotel. I was deeply moved by his warm gesture and nearly brought to tears. Though I couldn't forget everything immediately, I wanted to rebuild our relationship slowly over time. "Are you properly washing the sheets, Kate?" my father-in-law remarked as he lay on them. The thought of this becoming a regular occurrence sent a shiver down my spine. If we had lived together, such bizarre moments could have become part of my daily life. Just imagining it fills me with unease. A new chapter in my life began with a divorce, driven by irreconcilable differences over living arrangements. My name is Kate, and I experienced divorce at the age of 60. Yet, despite what others might think about aging, I believe that at 60, my journey through life is far from over. I've even taken on the challenge of learning how to use a computer, a skill that once seemed beyond me. By teaching myself through books, I refuse to let age hold me back from embracing new challenges. It's not that I'm trying to compete with the younger generation. Rather, I still see myself as young at heart. Life has thrown its share of challenges my way. The trouble began after my husband, Tham, and I finally paid off our mortgage, a decade after purchasing our home. We were in our late 20s when we bought the house, and as we neared the end of the loan, Tom started to bring up an old topic. "What do you think about living together?" he asked. "Living together? What do you mean by that?" I replied, though I already knew. "I mean with my parents," he said. This was a conversation we had before, and my feelings hadn't changed. "Tom, I think it would be difficult. Your mother and I don't get along very well. If we live together, it will just make things worse for both of us. I'm happy with how things are now. We won't know how it'll turn out unless we try," he insisted. "Once we start living together, we can't just stop. You never want to try anything new." Tom had been suggesting this ever since we got married, even though he had been firmly against living together before the wedding. I felt relieved then, but after our marriage, he gradually changed his tune, as if he had been trying to trick me all along. I later found out that his mother, Jane, had been pleading with him, saying, "I'm worried about the future. Don't you care about us when we're old?" Without my knowledge, Tom had developed a sense of duty to live with his parents out of filial piety. I wished he had realized he had the right to refuse. I understand wanting to take care of your parents, but Tom knew about the tension between his mother and me. Still, he seemed unfazed, even as our relationship became increasingly strained. As we neared the final payment on our mortgage, his suggestions to live together grew more frequent and more pressing. Then, one Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I answered it, I was shocked to see my father-in-law, Mark, and mother-in-law, Jane, standing there with bright smiles. The early morning sun cast a glow around them, almost making the scene seem sacred, but I knew better. While I stood there, stunned by their surprise visit, Tom appeared behind me and welcomed them in with a cheerful, "Welcome back." "Welcome back," I thought. Normally, when visiting someone's house, you say, "Thank you for inviting me," and the host says, "Welcome." But Tom's frequent question, "What do you think about living with my parents?" flashed through my mind. This was troubling, and I couldn't just brush it aside any longer. What was happening? I followed my in-laws back into the room and found Jane carefully inspecting the antique cabinet. Unable to hold back, I asked, "What are you doing?" "Oh, there are quite a few scratches here," she replied, her tone full of concern. "It's a shame to replace it with a new one, though. Kate, you seem a bit clumsy. Please handle it more carefully from now on." What? I had chosen that cabinet myself, and after examining the spots Jane was pointing out, I couldn't find any scratches. Perhaps she was mistaking the natural wood grain for damage due to her aging eyesight. No, I have aging eyes too, but even I can't see what she's talking about. But this wasn't the first time Jane had made baseless accusations like this. It seemed she couldn't stand the idea of a daughter-in-law taking away her precious son. Despite how unfair her remarks felt, I decided to let it slide as usual. Suddenly, I noticed that Mark was nowhere to be seen. Just then, I heard some noise coming from the second floor. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized what was happening. I hurried upstairs, and to my disbelief, I found Mark lying on my bed. Not Tom's bed, face down. "No way," I blurted out in shock. "Kate, are you washing the sheets properly?" Mark asked, completely oblivious to my horror. No, I stammered, my voice rising in disbelief. "Absolutely not. Please spare me that." My words came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. "What's that?" "Such insolence from a daughter-in-law," Mark snapped. "This has nothing to do with being a daughter-in-law." "Why are you sniffing someone else's bed?" I shot back, incredulous. "I was just checking if it's properly washed." "There's no need for that," I exclaimed. "Yes, there is," Mark insisted. "It's a necessary check for someone who's going to live here." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Really, the thought of living with such an insolent daughter-in-law is making me anxious already," he muttered. "Living together." The words left Mark's mouth, and I felt my world tilt as the unexpected reality of his statement sank in. I stood frozen in shock as Tom and Jane appeared behind me. "My, it's noisy here." "So this is where everyone is," Tom said, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Your father is talking about living together," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "What's that about?" "Exactly what it sounds like," Tom replied casually. "Huh? What do you mean by that?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "We finished paying off the house mortgage this month," Tom said, "so we've decided to live here with my parents." "What? You decided that on your own?" I exclaimed, disbelief turning into anger. "I've been asking about living together for a while, hadn't I?" Tom said, as if this was a reasonable explanation. "And I said no, I can't live with someone who goes around sniffing people's sheets." I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "Did you say that in response to what Mark said?" Tom asked, his expression showing confusion. I clenched my fists tightly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Well, don't worry about it," Jane chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Now that the mortgage is paid off, your role is over." She smiled brightly, as if she'd just announced something wonderful. "What?" I retorted, unable to believe what I was hearing. "That's right," Mark added with a scoff, waving me away dismissively. "You're no longer needed. You can get out." I felt a cold realization wash over me. So that's how it was. For years, I had been nothing more than a means to an end for my in-laws, a wallet to help pay off the mortgage. Jane had been watching our lives closely, biding her time, never giving up on her dream of living together. Now that the mortgage was fully paid, she believed she could have her beloved son back, and I could be discarded like yesterday's news. Fury bubbled up inside me as the full extent of their manipulation became clear. Certainly, I bore some responsibility for letting things get to this point, but this house was important to me too. There was no reason for me to be subjected to so much distress. But then, in a flash of inspiration, I remembered something, a fact that suddenly wiped away my despair and irritation. "All right then, that's fine," I said calmly, surprising even myself. Tom's eyes widened in shock at my unexpectedly smooth response. He had clearly never imagined that I would agree so easily. Perhaps Tom thought I would beg to stay or reconsider, but I was resolute. Up until the moment I left the house, he kept suggesting, "Won't you reconsider?" But I stood my ground. Ultimately, we divorced amicably. A month after the divorce, while I was enjoying the freedom of living in a hotel, having lost my place to live, I received a message from Jane, my former mother-in-law. She insisted on meeting me. Although I found it bothersome, I agreed, slightly hopeful as I had an inkling of what it might be about. When I arrived at the cafe where we had agreed to meet, I found Jane and the rest of the family, including Tom, sitting with gloomy expressions. As soon as she saw me, Jane's eyes welled up with tears. "Kate, thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaky. "What brings everyone together? Is there something you need from me?" I asked, curious but wary. "Actually, we received the notice of the division of assets from you yesterday," Jane began. "Well, yes, it's only natural to proceed with the division of assets since we're divorced, right?" I replied, maintaining a neutral tone. Yes, but the situation has changed a bit from before, she continued, looking even more despondent. How so? I asked, sensing that something more was at play. My question seemed to dishearten them even further. Tom's company went under, Jane finally admitted. I clapped my hands together with a smile. I saw that coming. It was only a matter of time. What do you mean by a matter of time? Jane asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. In recent years, Tom's salary had been decreasing, and there were signs like delayed payments last month. Those are typical precursors to a company's bankruptcy. How could you not see it? I responded sharply. Jane, who should have had Tom's best interests at heart, asked angrily, "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Tom flinched in fear, clearly rattled by the conversation. "I never thought it would actually go under," he mumbled. "Normally you'd notice such signs," I retorted, incredulous at their obliviousness. "Eh?" Tom stammered, surprised by my response. I immediately pressed, "So you didn't gather us here just to say that Tom lost his job, did you? What's the real reason we're here?" Everyone fell silent, momentarily lost for words. Finally, Tom spoke up. "The truth is, our house burned down. It was caused by my father's smoking. We suffered a huge loss because we decided to live with my parents." Stunned, I took a moment to process the gravity of their situation. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I had indeed anticipated Tom losing his job when I decided to divorce him. I was unwilling to continue supporting a self-centered, jobless husband. Moreover, if we had lived together, I would have likely struggled with the pensioner lifestyle of my in-laws and possibly the burden of their care. Divorce seemed like the best choice for me. However, I hadn't anticipated Mark burning down the house. This was turning into quite the story to tell. "I'm sorry to hear that, but it really is a tough situation," I said, masking my amusement. "Now that my parents have also lost their home, they have nowhere to live and don't know where to start," Tom explained. "So, you've become both homeless and jobless," I remarked, unable to resist pointing out the irony. "Please, stop saying it like that," Tom pleaded. "I'm technically homeless too, since I'm living in a hotel at the moment," I continued, "but I've bought a new house, so I'll be moving out of that status soon." "What?" The shock on their faces was priceless. Time to enjoy their reaction. "Do you know the high-rise condominium near the station? I'll be starting my new life there soon." A high-rise condominium? The mention of it instantly changed their expressions. It seemed a high-rise was a symbol of luxury and aspiration for them. My choice to live there wasn't out of desire for prestige, but for a secure and convenient living environment after the divorce. I wasn't even interested in the view. I chose a lower floor to avoid the hassle of waiting for elevators. "We'd like to live there too, Kate. Can you forget about the past and let us live with you?" Jane asked, desperation in her voice. "That would be great, Kate, please." Though I had half expected it, I couldn't hide my astonishment at their audacity, asking to live with their recently divorced former daughter-in-law. Could it be that Mark intends to bring calamity even to a high-rise condominium? "I'd like to help, but I'm no longer necessary to you all, remember? I was just a wallet to you," I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. "Actually, we've always highly valued your skills around the house," they claimed, backtracking quickly. "The house felt brighter with you around, Kate. You're considerate, beautiful, and incomparable to our son. Now that he's unemployed, he's beyond our control." Their son stood silently amidst the groveling, clearly uncomfortable. It seemed that no matter how beloved a son, if he couldn't support them, he was no longer of use to them. What terrible parents. "Well, if we all lived together, it might not be so bad," I said, feigning consideration, prompting shocked expressions from my in-laws and Tom. "It could be more fun than I thought." "What do you mean by that, Kate?" Tom asked, his confusion evident. "I mean it quite literally," I replied, my smile seemingly lifting everyone's spirits. However, facing my ex-husband again felt a bit awkward. "Well, if that's the case," Jane interjected cheerfully, "don't worry about it. Tom doesn't have to live with Kate." Tom looked surprised. "What? Why not?" Mark added, "That's right, Tom should live somewhere else. We'll take advantage of Kate's generosity." "Why am I the only one left out?" Tom protested. "You don't have an income," Mark explained. "We have our pensions, so we can contribute to food. But you can't." I really wanted to point out that moving into a high-rise and thinking food expenses would cover everything was naive, but I chose to stay silent and watched as the family conflict unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Then why don't you, who have a pension, rent another place? I suggested. You've lost your job and we can't afford such frivolous spending. What if something happens? Mark countered. What are you talking about? We're still young. Elderly people should. Tom cut him off. How disrespectful. We still have our youth. One of them retorted. If you're so young, then work and use that income for the future. I can't even take a bath or go to job interviews in this situation, Tom shot back. You can always wash yourself in the river, came the reply. Always thinking about yourself, another added. Huh, you say that as if you do anything yourself, was the sharp comeback. Who's a failure? Tom shot back. We don't need such a useless son anymore. Jane attempted to mediate, asking, Are you really okay with this? But Tom's reaction only seemed to infuriate Mark further, showing no signs of backing down. Turning to me with a smirk, Mark said, This means we'll have more room, right? We're almost excited about starting a new life in the high rise. Are you misunderstanding something? My cheerful smile seemed to confuse everyone. The size of the room is fixed from the start. I have no intention of living with you. What do you mean, Kate? Jane asked, clearly frustrated. You only mentioned that living with many people might be lively, but you never said we'd actually live together. That was the impression you gave, Jane argued. It's good to see you, who abandoned your husband to live in a high-rise, finally being seen for who you are. You've always looked down on me, and now it's clear you want nothing to do with us. Even after your house burned down, Jane added, her tone sharp. Tom, directing a severe gaze at his parents, said, Kate is right. I thought honoring my parents was the right thing to do, but it seems they don't really care about me. The in-laws were left stunned by Tom's words, their expressions shifting as they absorbed the reality of the situation. I was wrong, Tom said, his voice trembling. Let's cancel the disarmament. So, Dad, you just want to rely on your son again because you can't live with me, right? I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. No, that's not it at all, he stammered. His face was flushed and Mark, who had hit the mark, began to fluster. Witnessing this, Tom's anger was visibly rising, veins showing on his forehead. I refuse, he shouted. Parents like you, disarmament is fine by me. The in-laws, now in a panic, pleaded with Tom to listen, but he wouldn't hear any of it. He turned to me and said, Thanks to you, I really want to start over. Really? Are you serious? I asked, incredulous. I am serious. You've done something that woke me up, Tom said. You still have feelings for me, but you. Stop with that hopeful nonsense, I replied. I was only thinking it would be amusing if, after all the cozy family attempts, the man who left his wife for his parents ended up quarreling with them. I've only seen you as a means for property division, Tom continued. Property division, I echoed. You still plan to claim that from me? In this situation? This situation. I couldn't care less, I said. Of course, I hurriedly signed the divorce papers because I wanted to leave, but I can still claim my fair share of the property division after the divorce. Be prepared. Wait, don't you really love me? Tom asked desperately. How can I love someone who has no place to live or a job? I said. That's only possible in a fantasy world. No way, this can't be happening, Tom exclaimed. Unable to win me back, Tom's anger erupted. He lashed out at his parents, blaming them for everything and starting a commotion. Before things could escalate further, I left the scene. As promised, I received my fair share of the property division. The amount wasn't large, but it marked the end of my relationship with Tom. He now struggled with reduced finances and became estranged from his parents. Living a challenging life, he tried day labor and spent nights in cheap lodgings or parks, leading a nomadic lifestyle. His age made it difficult for him to find stable work, and his parents, not attempting to mend their relationship with him, seemed to abandon him, relying on their pensions alone. Years passed, and Tom's parents remained a couple, solely concerned with themselves. On my end, I had investments I started before the divorce, allowing me to live relatively comfortably. Recently, I began attending a local class to deepen my programming skills. Though most of my classmates are children and students, I find the interaction refreshingly enjoyable. I feel as if I've gained many grandchildren, even though I don't have children of my own. A young girl named Livy, who showed an interest in knitting, has been learning from me during breaks. Soon, other children joined in, creating a warm, vibrant atmosphere. Despite various life experiences, I'm determined to continue living a fun and fulfilling life true to myself. What do you think of Mom, Helen? I asked, unsure of how to phrase the question. He hesitated. What do I think of her? Well, she's someone who struggles to keep up with household chores. A bit slow, isn't she? He paused before adding, I guess, as a parent, I should scold you for saying that. But honestly, I can't argue because it's true. A sigh escaped his lips, as if the weight of that truth had finally settled in. Would you be happy with a new mom? I asked, curious but suddenly tense. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I think I would be. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A new mom. What does that even mean? My mind began to wander, grasping at dark possibilities. Cheating, divorce, ugly words that flashed before me like warning signs. But no, it couldn't be. Ewan would never. Would he? Just as my doubts turned into something closer to certainty, Ewan spoke again, this time with a smile that stretched across his face. Actually, I've been seeing someone. The words hit me like a slap. Trying to suppress the boiling anger, I forced myself to say, congratulations. My voice was strained, my fury barely contained. Inside, though, I felt it bubbling over, reaching its peak. I'm done, I declared, my voice cold. I'm quitting as both a mother and a wife. I'm also done being the one keeping this house afloat. From today, you're on your own. I could tell from the blank stares that my words hadn't sunk in, but I didn't care. Disappointment consumed me, and in that moment, I vowed to myself that I'd never let anyone betray me like this again. I'm Beth, 35 years old. Until recently, I juggled the roles of housewife and company employee. But life changed drastically when I married Yuan. 11 years ago, my marriage wasn't exactly a fairy tale. At that time, I was leading a major project, boosting the company's sales. I had proven myself, and my efforts didn't go unnoticed. I earned a raise along with the respect of my colleagues and superiors. Back then, work was everything to me. Marriage, it was barely a consideration. When family or friends asked, "Isn't it about time you found someone?" I would shrug it off, saying, "I'm not interested right now." That all changed after one particular evening. I had just finished a long day at the office when my boss, James, approached me. "Beth, could I steal a few minutes of your time? I need some advice." James was the department head, a talented and well-respected leader despite being only 40. He had mentored me from the day I started at the company, guiding me through the learning curves of my career. How could I say no? "Sure," I replied, curious. Relieved, he suggested, "How about a drink at the bar nearby?" I agreed, packed up my desk, and we headed out. As soon as we sat down, James downed 2 beers quickly, his face turning red. I knew he wasn't great with alcohol, so seeing him like this was unusual. Something was definitely on his mind. "So, what's this consultation about?" I asked, intrigued. "Ah," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's about a marriage meeting." The idea of James bringing up a marriage proposal was the last thing I expected. What could he possibly mean? I had always insisted that my career come first, pushing away any thoughts of marriage. "No, I'm not really interested in arranged marriages," I said with a shrug. James smiled softly. "I get that, but hear me out for a moment. Actually, I have a nephew who's about your age." "Is that so?" I replied, slightly intrigued. "His name is Ewan," James continued. "A while back, his wife left him, just disappeared one day." I felt a pang of sympathy. That must have been really tough. "It was," James said, his voice growing quieter. "It's a strange situation, but you actually look just like his ex-wife." I blinked, surprised, as James continued, looking somewhat guilty. "I know it sounds rude to bring up a marriage proposal just because of that, but Ewan has a young child." It made me think, for a kid who barely remembers their mother's face, having someone who resembles her might not feel so strange. I could see the logic, even though it unsettled me. A child, after all, needed a mother figure, and here I was, single, around the right age, and apparently resembling the woman who had abandoned them. James wasn't really asking for me to marry Ewan. He was asking me to fill that void, to step into a motherly role. It made sense, but it also felt wrong. I was appalled. My feelings, my individuality, had been completely overlooked. But I understood why James approached it as a consultation. He wasn't pushing me, just trying to find a solution for his nephew. After all, I had never even met Ewan. How could I give any kind of answer? "I understand what you're saying," I replied carefully, But since I don't know Yuan, I honestly don't know how to respond. James nodded, looking thoughtful. Yeah, I get that. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Actually, I've already spoken to Yuan a little, and I was wondering if you might be willing to meet him. Just once. I wasn't interested in marriage, but James had always been someone I respected, and I wanted to help in some way. After thinking it over, I agreed to meet Yuan. Just once. A few days later, the meeting was set. Yuan had arranged for us to meet at a high-end restaurant. I rarely frequented such places, and the thought made me a little nervous. Good evening, a clean-cut man greeted me as I arrived. He had an air of confidence and politeness about him. Good evening, I replied. You must be Yuan. That's me, he said with a smile. I'm glad to meet you. My uncle has told me a lot about you. Yuan was tall and slender, dressed impeccably in a suit that made him look like he had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. He escorted me to our table, and we spent the evening talking about everything under the sun. To my surprise, he never once mentioned anything about me resembling his ex-wife. Instead, he was genuine and kind, and I found myself drawn to his straightforward personality. As the evening wore on, I realized I was enjoying his company more than I had expected. After that dinner, we started seeing each other more often, and before I knew it, my feelings for Yuan had deepened. Then, one day, Yuan invited me back to the same restaurant where we had first met. We enjoyed a quiet, elegant dinner, and as we finished our meal and sipped wine, something cold touched my lips. Take a closer look, Yuan said with a playful smile. I looked down at the bottom of the glass, and there it was, a sparkling diamond ring rolling gently against the glass. Yuan reached for my hand. Beth, through all our conversations and time together, I've come to deeply love you, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I smiled, overwhelmed. Yes, I replied. Yuan hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. You might have heard from my uncle that you resemble my ex-wife. I nodded, feeling the small ache of hurt but remaining silent, waiting for him to continue. But he added, his gaze softening as he looked into my eyes, my love for you isn't based on something as superficial as that. It's you, Beth, everything about you that I've fallen for. And in that moment, any doubt I had melted away. I'm truly drawn to your inner self, Yuan confessed, his face slightly flushed. Whether from shyness or the wine, I wasn't sure. So, if you're willing, would you marry me? Yuan had always been a gentleman on our dates, sincere in his words, always showering me with compliments. I had spent my life focused on my career, but in that moment, I realized there was more I wanted. I had desires beyond my work, desires as a woman. Yes, I'd love to, I replied softly. I accept. And so, Yuan and I got married. As a condition of our marriage, I was asked to quit my job and become a housewife. It wasn't that I didn't feel some regret about leaving my career behind, but I wanted to support Yuan as his wife, so I agreed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Yuan was now my husband, and his daughter Helen became part of my daily life. It could have been a story of a simple, happy family, but life always has its unexpected turns. 11 years into our marriage, things began to change. Yuan's demeanor shifted. He became irritable, quick to anger over the smallest things. Perhaps it was the stress of work, but the man I had fallen in love with seemed to vanish, replaced by someone who raised his voice at every minor dissatisfaction. This, I told myself, was part of life. I bore his outbursts in silence, continuing to fulfill my role as a housewife. But soon the problem wasn't just Yuan's behavior. Helen, once sweet, now began to verbally abuse me as well. Whenever I tried to discipline her, Yuan would intervene. Don't be so harsh, he'd say, dismissing my concerns. It's your fault for not managing the house better. With her father's approval, Helen's insults grew worse, especially when he was around. I had thought it was just a phase, but her cruelty became relentless. One day, I asked her to clean her room. She didn't move, instead looking at me with disdain. Mom should do it, she retorted coldly. I brought this up to Yuan, hoping he would help, but he barely listened, showing no interest in parenting. You're the one raising her this way, he said, brushing off my concerns. Being a housewife must be easy. You don't even have to work. Just take care of the house. His words cut deep. It had been Yuan who insisted I leave my career, and yet here he was, diminishing my efforts as if my work at home meant nothing. When I tried to express my frustration, I was met only with sarcasm. You should only start complaining once you can actually do the housework properly, he sneered. Even after 10 years, you're still useless. My patience was wearing thin, no matter how hard I tried. My love for Yuan and Helen faded a little more each day. I felt trapped in a cycle of disrespect and neglect. As long as their attitudes remained unchanged, this situation would continue. I felt sorry for James, who had introduced us, but it seemed there was nothing left to be done. Despite my best efforts, I remained the target of constant criticism from both my husband and stepdaughter, and my heart grew colder with each passing day. I had always done my best to fulfill my role as a stay-at-home mom, but it seemed that time had finally caught up with me. One weekend, as I walked from my room to the bathroom, I overheard Yuan and Helen talking in the living room. I initially thought it was just more of their usual complaints, but I couldn't help but listen in. "What do you think about Mom?" Helen asked. "What do I think about her? She's slow and can't even manage the household chores properly," Yuan replied. "As a parent, I should probably scold you for saying this, but I can't argue because it's true." Their bluntness made me sigh involuntarily. But what came next was even more shocking. "Would you be happy if we got a new mom?" Yuan asked. "I would be happy," Helen answered. "A new mom? What does that mean?" I wondered, my mind racing with unsettling thoughts. Words like cheating and divorce swirled through my head. Though I did want to believe Yuan capable of such betrayal, my suspicions quickly solidified into reality. "Actually, I'm seeing someone," Yuan announced with a broad smile. The audacity of him discussing his affairs so openly with his daughter was beyond anything I could have imagined. This was a far cry from the Yuan I had once known. "Do you remember the woman who was with us the other day? Karen, she's really beautiful. I'm dating her now," Yuan said proudly. "What? Really? Congratulations," Helen replied, her seemingly innocent smile now appearing sinister to me. My patience was wearing thin, but I managed to stay calm enough to record their conversation on my smartphone. As they continued to discuss the affair with evident joy, I realized that any love I had for them had vanished completely. It was astonishing how quickly my feelings dissolved. I had clung to the hope that our family might find happiness again, but that hope was crushed. I felt a deep sense of betrayal and frustration, my tears reflecting the realization that they had turned their hearts elsewhere. In that moment of anguish, I vowed to seek revenge. I decided to hire a detective agency to gather information on the person my spouse was having an affair with. I already knew her name, so I expected the results to come through quickly. Gradually, I found a small sense of satisfaction in plotting my revenge. When I returned home, Helen confronted me as usual. "Did you go out to play somewhere since you don't work?" she asked dismissively. Her words barely registered with me now. All that remained in my heart was a growing sense of loathing for her. "Oh, by the way, there's an overnight school trip tomorrow. Make sure you prepare lunch," she added nonchalantly, as if tossing aside a piece of trash. Her blatant disregard stunned me, but panic soon set in as I realized I hadn't been informed about this earlier. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep this from me until now?" I asked, my voice a mix of panic and frustration. Yuan, who had been observing from the living room sofa, coldly told me not to make a fuss and just get it ready. I was too exhausted to argue, so I headed to the kitchen. As I prepared the lunch, I overheard Yuan and Helen chatting in the living room. "Helen, don't end up like that. Being a housewife is an easy job meant for those with low abilities. You're smart like me, so you'll get a job and work in the future," Yuan said. "Yeah, I'll definitely do that. It doesn't matter if Mom is here or not. I'll make sure to live independently," Helen responded. Her words would have been commendable if they weren't underscored by her earlier disdain. After finishing the lunch preparation and returning to the living room, I saw Yuan engrossed in his smartphone, smirking at something on the screen. I assumed he was playing an online game until I glanced at the screen and saw a photo of a young woman. It must have been his affair partner. I was stunned that he was so brazenly looking at her photo in front of me. My husband's obsession with his affair partner and my daughter's continued scorn reached a breaking point. In a surge of anger, I abandoned cleaning up the kitchen and locked myself in my room. The sound of their criticism from outside was now background noise to my resolve. I had made up my mind to leave this house. It might have seemed like a rash decision, but once Yuan's affair was exposed, I knew I had to go. Tomorrow became the day I would finally leave. Yuan and Helen no longer mattered to me. I announced to Helen, who was getting ready for school, and Yuan, who was dressing for work, "I'm quitting my roles as a mother, wife, and breadwinner today. With that, I confidently walked out of the house. They seemed stunned by my words, but it no longer mattered to me. I drove to my parents' house, which was a bit farther away, with my car packed full of my belongings. The statement about ending my role as the breadwinner held special significance. Ever since Helen started elementary school, I had noticed that the living expenses Yuan provided were dwindling. It became clear that he was probably spending the money on games or gambling before it even reached the household budget. Realizing this couldn't continue, I secretly started an ID consulting business from home without informing Yuan or Helen. My prior experience as a career woman proved beneficial, and the business became successful. Eventually, my income surpassed Yuan's, making me the primary provider for our household. The day after I left, Yuan bombarded me with emails, likely recognizing that the account for living expenses was nearly empty. I had withdrawn all the money I'd earned just before I left. The depleted balance was his own doing, and I didn't see it as my concern. Unable to handle the situation any longer, Yuan showed up at my parents' house. When the doorbell rang incessantly, I checked the intercom and saw a visibly distressed Yuan. Reluctantly, I answered the door, concerned that the noise might disturb the neighbors. As soon as I opened the door, Yuan began apologizing. "I was wrong. Please, can we go back to how things were? The house is a mess without someone to clean," he pleaded, treating me like nothing more than a maid. His apology felt more like a contemptuous routine than genuine remorse. I was thoroughly disgusted. "You don't need such an incompetent wife, do you?" I replied coldly and closed the door. Yuan continued to ring the bell for a while but eventually gave up and left, defeated, which I observed from the window. A week later, Helen called me, clearly distressed. I answered the phone with a hint of amusement as she began to rant. "Ever since you left, Dad hasn't been going to work, comes home late, and I can't keep up with household chores. My clothes are dirty, and I'm being laughed at school," she complained. Despite knowing my actions were harsh, I saw it as a consequence of their own making. "So what?" I asked. "It's not a so what, it's all because you abandoned us and left. Come back," Helen demanded, showing no remorse, only anger and dissatisfaction. "How convenient for you to demand that now. After all this time, you've treated me as if I were incompetent. If you're so capable, handling household chores should be a breeze, right?" I retorted, leaving Helen speechless. "Do it yourself," I said bluntly and hung up. Helen tried calling several times afterward, but I blocked her number to avoid further calls. Just when I thought I had found some peace, Yuan arrived at my parents' house with Helen a few days later, looking worn out. Yuan tried to persuade me to return, citing their financial struggles. "You're working, so wouldn't you be okay?" I dismissed him casually, and he persisted in his attempts to convince me. I had lent all my money to someone in need, likely his affair partner. It was clear that he was still trying to deceive me, but I was more astonished than outraged to learn that he still felt guilty. The living expenses had suddenly vanished. "Did you take them?" he asked, admitting his wrongdoing but begging me to return even a small portion. Faced with his accusation and feeling like a thief, I was momentarily speechless. I decided it was time to reveal the truth. I had been supporting our household with the income from my own company. My business, specializing in remote services and virtual spaces, was thriving, and my income far exceeded his annual salary. "That's nonsense. It has to be a lie," Yuan insisted. "I'm not lying. You've always belittled me, but in reality, I was the main provider. Rent, groceries, utilities, Helen's allowance, and school fees, all were covered by me," I explained. Their shocked and crumbling demeanor was almost comical. "It doesn't matter. Just come back. If not, I won't leave here," Yuan said, sitting on the floor like a petulant child, refusing to stand. Seeing their desperate pleas made me reconsider. I decided to return to the house with one goal in mind. Upon arrival, I was greeted by a sight that confirmed my decision. Unwashed clothes piled up and garbage bags stacked everywhere. Yuan's arrogance returned the moment he saw me. "See, do your job as a full-time homemaker," he sneered, as if my return was some sort of triumph for him. "You should rely on your mistress instead," I retorted. "Mistress? What are you talking about?" Yuan feigned ignorance, though it was clear he knew. I presented the detective's report and played recordings from my smartphone. "Here's the evidence. Plus, you were openly discussing dates with her in the living room. You can't deny it." Yuan was speechless. "Anyway, I'm divorcing you. Don't ever show your face to me again. He continued to plead, but I was unmoved. My income is many times yours. Do you think I have any reason to stay? If this doesn't convince you, we can go to court. You've used and insulted me for too long. Finally, he was left speechless. Helen, speaking up for her father, demanded, It's the worst to abandon your own daughter. I'm a minor. You should take care of me. I can't stay in this house anymore. Take me with you. Her arrogance was infuriating. I firmly refused and decided to reveal a cruel truth. Helen and I were not blood relatives. We were complete strangers. Her shocked expression was almost satisfying. What? I'm not your real mother. Your biological mother left, but Beth, your current mom, resembled her, and you took to her right away, I said, relishing her disbelief. What? Dad, what's going on? Helen's voice trembled with confusion. Oh, your real mother ran away. Beth looked like her, so you accepted her as your mom, Yuan explained, though his words seemed half-hearted. Helen began to cry, unable to comprehend the deception. Despite my efforts to be a mother to her, it was clear this was the end. I no longer felt any love, only disdain. You've always blamed me for everything. Fix it yourself, I said, and quickly left the house. After returning to my parents' home, they continued to contact me for a while, but I ignored them until the calls stopped. I divorced Yuan and demanded compensation from him and his mistress for the emotional distress they caused. Helen became more introverted and avoided people at school, her behavior leading to a lack of friends and apparent neglect. Yuan started missing work frequently and was eventually demoted. They eventually moved to a cheap apartment, struggling financially. I hope Helen reflects on her actions and matures into a respectable adult. Ultimately, Yuan was abandoned by both his wives, including me. My tumultuous marriage came to an end, but I am now thriving. My work is going well, and a new project is on the horizon. While the challenges of dealing with Yuan and his family were significant, I am dedicated to the success of my new endeavor and looking forward to a hopeful future.